Good evening. That depends on how long you've been awake. If you're listening to this while the city outside has gone quiet, when streetlights hum instead of shine, when rooms feel slightly larger than they should, then you've tuned in at exactly the right time. Tonight's broadcast is not meant to frighten you awake. It's meant to sit with you, to linger in the space between one breath and the next. The stories you're about to hear are not legends. They don't begin with warnings, and they don't end with answers. They exist in places you already recognize. Apartments that feel wrong at night, roads that don't remember where they lead, rooms that shouldn't exist, trains that arrive when no one is waiting. Each story stands alone, and yet they share a quiet understanding. That time is not as stable as we pretend. That places remember more than people do, and that sometimes survival is not the same as escape. So settle in. Lower the lights. If you're listening in bed, don't worry about falling asleep. If these stories follow you into your dreams, that just means you are listening properly. This is a midnight broadcast, and once it begins, it does not rush to end. The door under the bed. The first thing I noticed was not the silence, but the absence of taste. London, in late July, has a very particular smell, even inside a modern apartment, even with the windows shut. The city seeps in hot stone, old rain trapped in brick, faint exhaust drifting between buildings like a tired ghost. I had lived in this flat long enough to recognize the city by scent alone. Some mornings smelled metallic. Some nights carried damp moss and overheated wiring. On weekends, the curry house downstairs bled cumin and cardamom through the vents. That Monday morning, none of it reached me. I stood in my kitchen, barefoot on cold tile, holding a mug of coffee that might as well have been hot water. I took another sip, slower this time, waiting for bitterness, for warmth, for anything that confirmed the liquid was real. Nothing arrived. No aftertaste, no scent rising with the steam. Just heat sliding down my throat like an idea I couldn't quite hold. I remember thinking briefly, stupidly, that perhaps I was still half asleep. The apartment was newly built, one of those glass and concrete developments squeezed between older Victorian blocks, pretending to be clean and neutral and forgettable. Pale walls, hidden lighting, floors that clicked softly when you walked across them, like they were listening. The bedroom faced an inner courtyard where sound collected and lingered. Footsteps from other residents, a distant lift bell, the occasional cough that didn't belong to anyone you could see. I moved through the morning on autopilot, showered, dressed, brushed my teeth, noting with mild curiosity that the mint never arrived. No sharpness, no cooling sensation, just foam and motion. On the tube to work, I leaned my head against the window and tried to breathe deeply. Normally, the underground assaulted the senses: oil, dust, human closeness, but that day it felt hollow, as if someone had turned the volume knob down on the world, leaving only shapes and movement behind. By lunchtime, the unease had grown teeth. I ordered something spicy on purpose, vindaloo, from the same place I'd eaten at for years. When it arrived, the smell should have announced itself before the container even opened. Instead, I peeled back the lid and stared at the food like a stranger's belongings. I ate mechanically, watching steam rise, feeling heat on my tongue but no flavor following it. The spice never bloomed. My eyes didn't water. My nose remained stubbornly empty. That was when the thought settled in, heavy and slow. Something had gone missing. The GP was polite in the way doctors become when they already know they don't have answers. Loss of taste and smell, he explained, could be stress-related, viral, neurological, temporary. He shone lights into my eyes, had me identify scents I couldn't detect, tapped reflexes that behaved normally. When I mentioned the timing, how it had started suddenly, overnight, he nodded as if that helped him file the problem into a familiar drawer. "You said this happened before?" he asked. I hesitated. Not exactly, but last year, around this time, I noticed food tasted muted. I didn't think much of it, and now there's nothing. It's like someone reached in and switched something off. He smiled thinly. The brain is very good at convincing us of things. He told me to monitor it, to reduce stress, to come back if it didn't resolve. As I left the clinic, the sun pressed down hard on the pavement. July in London didn't roar the way it did elsewhere. It simmered. The heat gathered between buildings, trapped and sour, but I couldn't smell it, couldn't taste the stale air. People around me fanned themselves, wiped sweat from their faces, complained into phones. I felt detached from all of it, wrapped in a kind of sensory insulation that muffled the world. That night, I noticed the sound. It came sometime after midnight, once the city had settled into its deeper rhythms. Not silence, London never truly slept, but the low, continuous hum of distant traffic and electrical systems breathing through walls. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The heat clung to the room despite the open window. My sheets stuck to my skin. Somewhere in the building, water moved through pipes with a tired groan, and then, beneath it all, something else emerged. A thin, dry sound, like air being dragged through a narrow space. At first, I thought it was the floor settling. New buildings always made noises, clicks, creaks, faint pops as materials expanded and contracted. But this was different. This had rhythm, a slow, deliberate pull, followed by a pause, then another. I rolled onto my side and listened. The sound came from beneath the bed, not directly under me, but closer to the far corner, where the wooden floorboards met the wall. A narrow seam ran there, barely noticeable in daylight. In the dark, it felt wider, more intentional. The sound slid through that seam like breath through teeth. I held my own breath without meaning to. The noise stopped. For several seconds, there was nothing but the familiar hum of the city. My heart beat loudly in my ears, each thump sounding too large for my chest. Then the sound returned softer this time, almost cautious. I told myself I was imagining it, that anxiety was playing tricks on my mind. I had read enough articles about how stress could manifest physically, how the brain could fabricate sensations when something felt out of control. Still, I did not sleep. The next morning, I met Mrs. Calder on the stairs. She lived 2 floors below me, in a flat identical in layout but older in feeling, as if she had brought something from another time with her when she moved in. She was small, gray-haired, always wrapped in layers regardless of the weather. I had exchanged pleasantries with her before, nothing more. She was the sort of neighbor you nodded to, not someone you confided in. She stopped halfway up the stairs when she saw me, her hand tightening on the railing. "You look hollow," she said. The words landed heavier than they should have. "I'm just tired," I replied, automatically. She studied my face in a way that made me acutely aware of my skin, my breathing, the space around my mouth. Her eyes flicked briefly toward my lips, then back to my eyes. "How long has it been?" she asked. I frowned. "How long has what been?" She hesitated, as if weighing whether to continue. The stairwell smelled faintly of cleaning chemicals and old dust at least. I assumed it did. I couldn't detect anything myself. "The week of the full moon," she said finally. "July, that's when it starts." A chill moved through me, despite the heat. "I don't know what you mean." Mrs. Calder leaned closer, lowering her voice. "You should be able to smell yourself. You're flat. Your food. If you can't..." She swallowed. "Then it's already begun." My mouth felt dry. "Begun what?" She straightened abruptly, as if someone else had entered the stairwell. Her gaze darted upward, toward the higher floors, before returning to me. "Never mind," she said. "Just listen carefully at night, and whatever you hear..." She paused. "Don't answer." Work. Before I could ask her to explain, she continued up the stairs, her footsteps slow and deliberate, leaving me standing alone with the echo of her words and the unsettling sense that something had shifted, something I had not yet learned how to name. That night, the sound beneath the bed was louder, closer, and for the first time, it sounded like it was learning how to breathe. I did not ask Mrs. Calder what she meant. That decision, more than anything else, would later feel like consent. The following days slid past me with an unnatural smoothness, as if time itself had lost texture. Without taste or smell, meals became obligations rather than experiences. I ate because my body expected it, because the clock insisted it was time. The act of chewing felt pointless, hollow, like rehearsing a memory instead of living one. The sounds at night, however, grew sharper. I stopped sleeping in the dark. A small lamp stayed on beside the bed, its warm circle of light barely reaching the floor. It did nothing to illuminate the space beneath the bed, but it gave me something to anchor myself to, a proof that the room still obeyed familiar rules. The breathing sound no longer pretended to be subtle. It arrived each night with a patience that felt practiced. Not immediately after I lay down, but later, once my thoughts began to drift. Once my body loosened into that fragile state between waking and sleep, the sound slid through the gap in the floorboards with increasing confidence, as if it understood the architecture better than I did. Inhale, pause, exhale longer this time, almost indulgent. I began measuring it against my own breathing without meaning to, matching the rhythm, then deliberately breaking it, just to see if the sound would follow. It never did. That was worse. By Thursday, the headache started. A dull pressure settled behind my eyes, intensifying whenever I lay down. When I stood, it eased slightly, as if gravity itself was rearranging something inside my skull. I tried painkillers. They dulled the edges but never reached the center of the ache. I returned to the GP. He frowned at my chart, then at my face. "You look detached," he said. "I feel like something's wrong with my breathing," I replied. The words surprised me as they left my mouth. "Not that I can't breathe, just that it doesn't feel like mine." He asked routine questions. Anxiety, sleep patterns, stress. He avoided my eyes when I mentioned the sounds at night, the way doctors do when they decide a symptom belongs to imagination rather than physiology. When I left, he suggested meditation. That evening, I found a note pushed halfway under my door. The paper was thin, yellowed, torn from what looked like an old notebook. The handwriting was precise but shaky, as if the writer had been cold. "You must not speak. Not to it. Not to yourself. Not even to your own reflection. 24 hours. No exceptions." I stood in the hallway for a long time, the paper trembling slightly between my fingers. Mrs. Calder's door was closed when I knocked. I didn't knock loudly, just enough to announce myself, enough to be polite. No answer came. The corridor felt different that night. Narrower. The lights hummed faintly, flickering just enough to make shadows hesitate before settling. I became acutely aware of my own footsteps, of the sound they made traveling down the length of the hall, as if someone or something were listening from the other end. Back inside my flat, I locked the door and pressed the note flat on the kitchen counter. I read it again, and again. The idea of silence frightened me more than the breathing beneath the bed. Speech had always been a kind of anchor, a way to reassure myself that I existed, that I occupied space. The thought of surrendering it, even temporarily, felt like stepping to the edge of something vast and dark. But the sound beneath the floorboards had changed. It was no longer just breathing. Sometimes, between the inhale and exhale, there was a faint vibration, almost like the beginning of a word that never quite formed. A pressure against the air, testing its shape. I decided to follow the rule. I began the silence at midnight. I turned off my phone, unplugged the landline, muted every device that might tempt me into response. I closed the curtains, dimmed the lights, and sat on the edge of the bed, hands resting flat against my thighs, grounding myself in physical sensation. No speaking, no whispering, no sound shaped by intent. The first hour was easy. The second brought an unexpected challenge. My own thoughts grew louder, without the option of expression. Words crowded my mind, pressing against my teeth, eager to escape. I clenched my jaw, breathing slowly through my nose, or what I assumed was my nose, since I could no longer feel air passing through it in any meaningful way. Around 2 a.m, the breathing beneath the bed shifted. It no longer waited for me to settle. It began as soon as the silence did. Inhale, pause, exhale. The sound was closer now, as if whatever lay beneath the floorboards had moved nearer to the seam. The wooden planks responded with faint, sympathetic vibrations, the way a body reacts to another body lying too close. I stared straight ahead, focusing on the wardrobe door opposite the bed. Its surface reflected just enough light to suggest depth without clarity. My own reflection hovered there, indistinct, unfinished. Something scraped softly beneath me. Not a claw, not a hand, more like a careful adjustment, as if a weight were redistributing itself. Then came the voice. It did not arrive fully formed. At first, it was only pressure and indentation in the air, like a sound waiting to happen. Then, a breath passed through it, shaping it gently, experimentally. Hello? The words slid through the gap in the floorboards, distorted, stretched thin by distance and wood and something else I could not name. It sounded unfinished, as though the speaker were still learning how to assemble language. My chest tightened. I pressed my lips together until they hurt. The voice waited. Seconds passed, then minutes. The silence between us thickened, charged with expectation. I became painfully aware of my own breathing, of the noise it made as air moved in and out of my lungs. The voice tried again. This time, it used my name. It pronounced it correctly. I felt the sound of it more than I heard it, a vibration that traveled up through the bed frame, through the mattress, into my bones. My fingers twitched, muscles responding before thought could intervene. I bit down hard on the inside of my cheek. Pain flared, sharp and immediate, anchoring me to the present moment. Blood filled my mouth, metallic and warm, but still tasteless. I swallowed reflexively, fighting the urge to gasp, to curse, to make any sound at all. The voice beneath the bedside, it sounded disappointed. The breathing resumed, slower now, deeper, as if drawing something more than air from the space above it. The headache behind my eyes intensified, pulsing in time with each inhale. I stayed awake until dawn. When the first gray light seeped through the curtains, the breathing faded. The air in the room felt thinner somehow, stretched tight like fabric pulled too far. I checked the clock. 6 hours of silence down, 18 to go. And for the first time since this began, I was certain of one thing. Whatever lived beneath my bed was not trying to scare me. It was trying to make me answer. Silence changes the shape of a room. I learned that sometime after sunrise, when the city outside my windows came fully awake and yet my flat remained sealed in its own pocket of quiet. I did not speak. I did not hum. I did not even clear my throat. Sound, when it came, arrived from elsewhere, pipes knocking faintly in the walls. Distant traffic filtered through glass. The low electrical whisper of appliances I had forgotten to unplug. Without my voice, the apartment felt less like a place I occupied and more like a place that was tolerating me. I moved carefully, aware of every contact point between my body and the world. The floor beneath my feet felt subtly different than it had before, less solid, as if it were listening to my weight, memorizing it. I caught myself pausing before stepping from one room to another, waiting for some internal signal that never came. The headaches did not fade with daylight. They intensified. The pressure behind my eyes deepened into something layered, like multiple thoughts stacked too closely together. When I closed my eyes, I saw shallow impressions of movement, shadows without sources, shapes that dissolved the moment I tried to focus on them. I avoided mirrors, not because I expected to see something else, but because I no longer trusted what I meant by myself. By mid-morning, I realized something else had changed. The hunger was gone, not satisfied, absent. My stomach no longer signaled need. There was no emptiness, no discomfort, just a neutral stillness, as if that system, too, had been quietly disconnected. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the fruit bowl on the counter, at the colors that suggested sweetness and acidity and texture, and felt nothing at all. The note, Mrs. Calder had left replayed itself in my mind, each line gaining weight with repetition. Not to it, not to yourself, not even to your own reflection. I wondered what would count as speaking to myself. Thoughts felt louder now, more intrusive, as if the absence of speech had created extra space inside my head, space something else was beginning to notice. The breathing returned early that afternoon. I was in the living room, sitting on the sofa, when I heard it through the floorboards beneath my feet. The sound had traveled. It was no longer confined to the bedroom. It slipped through the seams of the flat with ease, following me the way a smell might, except I could not smell anything at all. Inhale, pause, exhale. The rhythm was steadier now. Confident, I stood slowly, heart thudding, and backed away from the center of the room. The sound adjusted in response, shifting subtly, as though tracking my position from below. For the first time, I understood. It was not under the bed. The bed was simply where the opening was easiest. The afternoon stretched unnaturally long. Time lost its familiar markers without speech to divide it. I checked the clock obsessively, watching minutes crawl forward with deliberate cruelty. 12 hours, 13, 14, halfway. The building around me seemed to lean inward as the day wore on. The walls felt closer, the ceiling lower. I caught myself ducking slightly when passing beneath door frames, unsure why my body expected resistance where none existed. The first knock came just after sunset, 3 soft taps on the front door. I froze. No one ever knocked like that. Not delivery drivers, not neighbors. The sound was too careful, too considerate of the space it entered. It suggested someone who understood how easily noise could carry here. I did not move. The rule was clear. Another knock followed. Slightly firmer this time. I stepped back, pressing my shoulder against the wall, keeping my breathing as quiet as possible. The air in my lungs felt heavy, resistant, as though it had thickened while I wasn't paying attention. "Hello?" came a voice from the other side of the door. It was Mrs. Calder's. Relief surged through me, sharp and almost painful. My mouth opened before I could stop myself. I clamped it shut. Her voice sounded wrong, not false, misaligned. The cadence was hers, the accent familiar, but there was a hollowness beneath it, like a recording played through damaged speakers. Each word seemed to lag half a second behind the breath that carried it. "I know you're in there," she said gently. "I just want to talk." My hands curled into fists. The breathing beneath the floorboards quickened. Inhale, shorter pause, exhale. I stared at the door, imagining the wood thinning, the grain separating, creating narrow seams like the one beneath my bed. I imagined breath slipping through those spaces, testing them, widening them. "I tried the rule too, Mrs. Calder continued. "Years ago. I nearly made it." Her voice dropped, intimate now, as though she were standing very close to the door, as though her mouth were only inches from the gap beneath it. "I shouldn't have answered," she said softly. The knock came again once, directly in the center of the door, behind me, from the bedroom. The floor creaked. Something shifted its weight. I did not respond. After a long moment, the voice sighed. The footsteps retreated. I waited until the building settled back into its uneasy quiet before allowing myself to move again. My legs trembled, muscles protesting the sudden release of tension. 6 hours remained. The final hours of silence were the worst. Sleep became unavoidable, no matter how hard I fought it. My body betrayed me, dragging me toward the bed with a slow, irresistible pull. I lay down, fully clothed, keeping the lamp on, positioning myself rigidly on my back, eyes fixed on the ceiling. The breathing was directly beneath me now, so close I could feel the mattress dip slightly with each inhale. The headache crescendoed into something almost musical, a layered vibration that resonated behind my eyes, along my spine, inside my teeth. I tasted nothing, smelled nothing, felt only pressure and heat and the persistent sense that my outline was softening. The voice did not speak again. It didn't need to. Images drifted through my mind uninvited. Doors opening where there had never been doors before. Spaces beneath furniture stretching impossibly deep. Air moving through places it should not reach. I saw myself lying there, mouth open, breath rising visibly from my chest and slipping downward through the bed, through the floor, through a narrow opening that widened eagerly to receive it. My eyes fluttered shut. For a moment, I hovered, then sleep claimed me. When I woke, the room was quiet. The lamp was still on. Dawn light bled faintly around the edges of the curtains. My body felt light too, light as though something essential had been carefully removed. I sat up slowly. The headache was gone. So was the breathing. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood, steadying myself against the wall. The floor felt solid again. Ordinary. Almost disappointing. I checked the clock. 24 hours had passed. Relief washed through me. Weak but undeniable. I had followed the rule. I had won. As I turned toward the bedroom door, something caught my attention. The mirror on the wardrobe reflected the bed behind me. The sheets were rumpled. The pillow was indented, and lying beneath the covers was my body, asleep, breathing. I did not scream. That was the first thing that felt wrong. I stood there, barefoot on the bedroom floor, staring at the wardrobe mirror, watching my own chest rise and fall beneath the covers, and I felt no urge to cry out, no spike of panic sharp enough to fracture the moment. The reaction I had always associated with fear simply failed to arrive. Instead, there was a profound, almost reverent stillness. The body on the bed looked peaceful, more peaceful than I remembered feeling in weeks. Its mouth was slightly open, lips parted just enough to suggest ease rather than vulnerability. Each breath came slowly, evenly, as if measured by something that valued precision. I lifted my hand. The reflection followed. The body on the bed did not. That should have been enough to send me reeling, but my thoughts moved sluggishly, as if they were passing through a thicker medium than usual. Panic requires urgency. Whatever this was had dulled that edge. I stepped closer to the mirror. The glass felt colder than it should have when I pressed my palm against it. Not the sharp chill of winter, but the deep, persistent cold of something that had never been warm to begin with. My reflection stared back at me with unsettling clarity. Eyes too focused, posture too deliberate. Behind me, the bed creaked softly. I turned. The body shifted beneath the covers, adjusting its weight with a familiar unconscious movement. The sound was intimate in a way that made my stomach tighten. I had made that sound 1,000 times without thinking. Hearing it now, detached from the act, felt like overhearing something private that was never meant to be shared. The breathing beneath the bed resumed, but it no longer came from below. It came from me. Not from my chest. There was no rise, no fall there, but from somewhere deeper, less defined. Each inhale felt like an extraction. Each exhale carried a sense of loss, subtle but cumulative, like water draining from a vessel too slowly to notice until it was nearly empty. I backed away, my shoulder brushing the door frame. That was when I noticed the gap. The seam between the floorboards beneath the bed had widened. What had once been a narrow, forgettable line now resembled the edge of something unfinished. The wood around it looked worn, smoothed by repeated contact, as though countless hands or mouths had brushed against it over time. The air moved there, not a draft, not circulation, intention. I left the bedroom. The living room greeted me with the same neutral modernity it always had, but now it felt staged, too deliberate, like a set waiting for actors who had forgotten their cues. The sofa cushions bore impressions that suggested recent use, though I had not sat there since the silence began. The flat smelled of nothing. I moved toward the front door, driven by a sudden, desperate need for confirmation. If I could leave, if I could step into the hallway, feel the presence of other people, perhaps this dislocation would correct itself. My hand passed through the door handle, not through in the way ghost stories describe, but past, as though depth itself had been miscalculated. My fingers closed on empty air, an inch beyond the metal. I tried again, slower. The handle remained solid in my sight, useless to my touch. A sound came from the hallway. Footsteps, measured, familiar. Mrs. Calder's voice drifted through the door, clearer now than it had been the night before. "You made it through the quiet," she said. I pressed my ear to the wood. I could hear her breathing on the other side, steady and human. "You shouldn't have," she continued. Not all the way. My throat tightened. Words crowded my mouth, desperate and unformed. I wanted to ask her what had happened, what I had become, whether this could be undone. I remembered the rule, not even to yourself. I thought the silence would keep it out, Mrs. Calder said softly. That's what I believed too. But silence doesn't keep things out. It just makes room. The door shuddered faintly, responding to the sound of her voice. It doesn't steal your soul. she went on. Not exactly. Souls are loud, complicated, messy. A pause. It only wants your breath. The part of you that moves without asking permission. I closed my eyes. Images pressed forward, memories of lying awake as a child, counting breaths to calm myself, believing that as long as I could control that rhythm, nothing truly bad could happen. Breathing had always been the most basic proof of life, and now, it no longer belonged to me. I answered it. Mrs. Calder said, just once. It asked if I was lonely. Her voice trembled, just slightly. I'm very careful about my breathing now. The footsteps moved away. I was alone again. I returned to the bedroom slowly. The body on the bed had shifted again, turning onto its side. The sheets wrapped around it possessively, fabric drawn close in a way that felt almost protective. The breathing was deeper now, more assured. I knelt beside the bed. Up close, the body looked unmistakably real. I could see the fine lines around the eyes, a faint scar near the jaw I had earned years ago in a careless accident. This was not a copy, not a shell. This was me. And yet, as I watched, I noticed something subtle. The breaths did not pause. No hesitation between inhale and exhale. No moment of stillness where choice might live. The rhythm was flawless, mechanical in its consistency. Practiced, the gap beneath the bed darkened, not shadow depth. I felt a pull then, gentle but insistent, like a tide adjusting itself around a fixed object. The air around my face shifted, drawn downward toward the seam in the floorboards, toward the door that was no longer pretending to be anything else. I understood. Finally, the rule of silence had not saved me. It had only ensured that when the exchange happened, I would not interrupt it. The last thing I lost was weight. Not suddenly, nothing in this room happened suddenly, but gradually, the way a held breath thins out without the body noticing. The pull beneath the bed did not tug or tear. It invited. It adjusted the air until gravity itself seemed unsure of which direction it favored. I found myself rising. There was no sensation of leaving the floor, no vertigo, just a quiet subtraction, like a number reduced by one too many times. My feet no longer felt the boards. My knees forgot what they were for. The ceiling drifted closer, its pale surface revealing imperfections I had never bothered to notice before. Hairline cracks branching like dried riverbeds. A faint water stain shaped like a continent I couldn't name. I hovered there, near the light fixture, my outline thinning until it felt more like an idea than a body. Below me, the bed waited. The body slept on, untroubled. I watched the rise and fall of its chest with an intimacy that bordered on tenderness. The rhythm was flawless now. No catch, no sigh, no small human irregularities. Each breath traveled downward, slipping through the mattress, through the frame, toward the widening seam in the floorboards. The door beneath the bed was fully open. It did not resemble a door in the way I'd expected. There were no hinges, no frame, just a depth that drank air eagerly, edges worn smooth by long use. The darkness there was not empty. It was crowded with motion too subtle to separate into parts. Something breathed back. The exchange was complete. I understood that then, not with panic, but with a quiet clarity that felt borrowed. This was not a theft in the way stories warn you about. No violence, no chase, no screams, only a substitution so clean it bordered on mercy. The body inhaled, something else exhaled, and the room balanced itself around that new arrangement. The ceiling offered a perfect vantage point. From there, I could see the whole of the bedroom at once, the way it truly was, not as a place meant for rest, but as a careful alignment of openings and surfaces. The wardrobe mirror caught the lamplight and returned it faithfully. The curtains breathed slightly with the movement of night air. The floorboards held their secret without strain. I realized then that I was no longer inside the room. I was attached to it. When the body stirred, rolling onto its back, I felt the motion echo through me, a sympathetic vibration without sensation. When it sighed, a soundless release I could not hear, but somehow knew I felt a corresponding emptiness settle where urgency used to live. Time moved strangely after that. Morning came and went without touching me. Sunlight traced slow arcs across the walls, never quite reaching the space beneath the bed. The body woke, stretched, moved through the familiar motions of a day begun. It drank water. It dressed. It left the flat. The door closed. I remained. Hours later, footsteps returned. Keys. The soft thud of shoes by the door. The body moved through the living room, into the kitchen. It ate. It drank. It paused. Once. As if considering something it could not quite remember. Then it went to bed. The breathing resumed. Always steady. Always downward. I learned the building's other sounds from this angle, the way pipes knocked in patterns that resembled speech if you listened too long, the way the lift cables sang faintly at night, the way the corridor lights hummed, in sympathy with whatever moved beneath the floors. Sometimes, in the deepest part of night, I felt a pressure near where my mouth used to be, a suggestion, a shaping of air that hinted at language. I never answered. I didn't need to. The room spoke for me now. Weeks passed. Or months. It became difficult to tell. The full moon returned to July, pale and exact outside the window. The body beneath me slept through it, breathing perfectly, offering the room what it required. That was when I noticed the sound of another breath, not from the bed, from the corner of the room, near the skirting board, where the floor met the wall, and a seam had begun to darken. A familiar rhythm tested the space. Inhale, pause, exhale. Someone in the building was awake. Someone had noticed the absence of taste, the hollowing of scent, the way the world felt thinner than it should. Someone lay in their own bed, listening to the floorboards, telling themselves it was nothing. I watched the seam widen, just a fraction. The room prepared itself, and from the ceiling, weightless and patient, I understood my final role. Not a ghost, not a warning, but a witness, anchored to a place that would never again be empty, waiting quietly for the next breath to find its way home. The Red Battery. The rest stop wasn't on any map I trusted. I found it by accident, just past a stretch of Route 66 where the road flattened into something hypnotic, miles of asphalt humming beneath the tires, the horizon wavering like a bad memory. The sun was low, staining everything a tired orange, and my phone had dropped to 1 bar. No signal. No service, just the steady vibration of driving too long without stopping. The sign came first. A rusted rectangle leaning at an angle, its lettering almost entirely eaten away by wind and time. Rest area was still barely legible. Everything else had surrendered. The exit lane peeled away from the highway reluctantly, as if it hadn't been used in years and resented the attention. I slowed. For someone else, the place might have felt wrong. For me, it felt like content. I made my living chasing dead objects, things the world had discarded but hadn't fully let go of. Old tech. Forgotten formats. Machines designed for a purpose that no longer existed. My channel thrived on that quiet nostalgia, the strange intimacy of holding something that once mattered deeply to someone who is now gone. So when I saw the cracked concrete lot, the boarded-up vending machines, the low building slumped against the desert like it was exhausted from standing, I pulled in without hesitation. The silence hit first. Not total silence, nothing that dramatic, but the absence of human sound. No engines, no voices, no wind through trees, because there were no trees. Just the faint ticking of my cooling engine and a low electrical hum I couldn't immediately place. I grabbed my camera, checked the battery 87% and stepped out into the heat. The air smelled like dust and old metal, the kind of smell that clings to forgotten places. The building itself was a single-story concrete structure, windows filmed over with grime, doors chained but not locked. Someone had spray-painted over the original signage years ago. The colors sun-faded into something bruised and unreadable. Inside, the temperature dropped sharply. The main hall was wide and bare, stripped of anything portable long ago. The counters where maps and pamphlets once sat were empty except for a layer of dust thick enough to leave clear fingerprints. The bathrooms at the far end were dark, their doorways yawning open like mouths that had forgotten how to speak. That was when I noticed the glass case. It was mounted crookedly on the wall near what must have been the information desk. Most of its contents were gone brochures, emergency numbers, notices about weather and road conditions. But one thing remained: a pager. It sat alone on the bottom shelf, plastic casing dulled by age, screen dark but uncracked. The kind of device you only ever see in museums now or in crime documentaries from the early 90s. I hadn't held one in years, but my hand recognized it immediately when I reached for it. The moment my fingers closed around it, the screen lit up. A solid red bar filled the battery icon. 100%. I frowned. Old batteries didn't do that. Not without swelling, leaking, or dying outright. I turned the pager over, checking for corrosion, for a hidden power source, for anything that explained what I was seeing. Nothing. The casing was sealed. No charger port. No modification. Okay, I murmured to the camera. That's interesting. The sound of my own voice felt intrusive in the space, like I'd spoken too loudly in a church. I pressed a button. The screen flickered, then displayed a sequence of numbers. Not a phone number. Coordinates. Latitude. Longitude. I stared at them for a long moment, waiting for a message to follow. A name. A time. Anything that suggested human intent. Nothing came. The pager vibrated once in my palm, short, precise, and went still. The battery remained at 100%. Back in the car, I looked up the coordinates. They pointed to a location less than 30 miles away, just off the highway, near a bend in the road I'd passed earlier that afternoon. The pin dropped onto an empty stretch of desert with no labels, no businesses, no landmarks, except for one thing, a small gray marker, barely visible unless you zoomed in. Unsolved homicide. 1,993. I felt a tightness settle behind my eyes. Coincidences exist. Algorithms love patterns. The internet is full of half-documented crime scenes and speculative pins dropped by bored strangers. I knew all of this. I told myself all of this. Still, I didn't put the pager down. As I pulled back onto Route 66, the sun slipping fully behind the horizon, the red glow of the battery icon reflected faintly in the windshield. 100%. Unmoving, as if whatever powered it had no intention of running out. The highway looked different at night. Route 66 shed its nostalgia after dark. The postcards and neon memories belonged to daylight. At night, the road flattened into something functional and endless. A ribbon of black, cutting through land that had learned how to exist without witnesses. My headlights tunneled forward, swallowing distance in measured increments. Mile markers ticking past like a metronome I couldn't turn off. The pager sat in the cup holder, face up. I hadn't planned it that way. I told myself it was just easier to glance at while driving. But the truth was simpler. I didn't like the idea of it being out of sight. Every few minutes, I checked my phone's GPS. The coordinates matched. The pin grew closer with each mile, stubbornly precise, as if whatever had sent them knew exactly where I was going before I did. The pager vibrated once. I nearly swerved. The vibration was brief, controlled. Not the erratic buzz of a low battery or failing motor, but something intentional like a tap on the shoulder. I glanced down. The battery icon was still red, still full. No new numbers appeared. The vibration had come early. I slowed. The air outside the car felt heavier when I rolled down the window, warm and dry, carrying the faint smell of dust and something else. Old oil, maybe, or sun-baked rubber. The road ahead curved gently, pulling me toward a stretch of desert that looked identical to the last 10 miles I'd passed. When the GPS told me to turn, I almost missed it. The access road wasn't really a road at all, just a pale break in the terrain where tires had pressed the ground flat enough to suggest intention. No sign marked it, no reflectors. If I hadn't been actively looking for it, I would have driven straight past. I turned. Gravel crunched under the tires, the sound loud in the sudden quiet. The headlights picked out scrub, discarded bottles, the skeletal remains of a fence that no longer fenced anything. After a quarter mile, the land dipped slightly, and something pale emerged from the darkness. Concrete? What remained of it? I parked and cut the engine. The silence rushed in, immediate and total. The pager vibrated again, this time New coordinates appeared. They were the same as before. "You're already here," I said aloud, then frowned at myself. My voice sounded wrong in the open air, too thin against the desert. I grabbed the camera and stepped out, the heat clinging to my skin even after sunset. The site was small, too small. A concrete slab, fractured down the middle, half buried by sand and weeds. The rusted sign lay face down nearby, its posts snapped cleanly as if by force rather than decay. I nudged it with my foot, flipping it over. Only a few letters remained readable. "Stop." Below it, something else had been scratched into the metal by hand. "Found." I swallowed. This wasn't in any of the articles I'd skimmed earlier. I raised the camera, narrating automatically, falling back into habit. I described the location, the coordinates, the connection to the case. The words flowed, practiced and safe, even as my eyes kept drifting to the pager in my hand. As I spoke, the screen flickered. A new vibration, new numbers, another set of coordinates, further down the road. I lowered the camera. "That's not how pagers work," I said. The desert didn't respond. I drove for an hour, then two. The second location was harder to reach. The road narrowed, then disappeared entirely, forcing me to follow a dry wash that rattled the car and sent dust billowing up behind me. The stars above were painfully bright, scattered across the sky in indifferent abundance. This site was different. There was more left behind. A burned-out shell of a car rested on its side, half swallowed by sand. The metal was twisted, blistered, the windows long gone. Nearby, the ground dipped into a shallow depression ringed with stones that looked placed rather than scattered. I didn't need to check my phone. I recognized it from the photographs. Unsolved homicide. 1,991. I stood there, the pager warm in my hand, the battery unwavering. Something tugged at my attention. The car's rearview mirror, still attached inside the burned shell, caught the light from my flashlight. The glass was cracked but intact enough to reflect. I leaned closer. For a moment, I saw only myself. Dust-streaked face, eyes too bright, the camera hanging forgotten at my side. Then the reflection shifted. My features didn't change all at once. It was subtle, a slight slackening around the mouth, a tension around the eyes that didn't belong to me. I blinked hard, stepped back. The mirror showed me again. Normal. I laughed, short and sharp, the sound bouncing off the emptiness. "Long day," I muttered. The pager vibrated. A new message appeared, not coordinates this time, but a single line of text, rendered in blocky, outdated font. "Not yet." My reflection in the cracked mirror smiled. I did not. By the time I returned to the highway, my hands were shaking. I told myself I'd stop after the next location, that I'd gotten enough footage, enough proof, enough story to build an episode around without needing to chase whatever this was to its end. The pager had other plans. It vibrated again before the GPS could update, as if anticipating my hesitation. The new coordinates pointed farther east, deeper into a stretch of road I knew too well, the kind of place where towns thinned out and history clung to the edges of things. I glanced at the rearview mirror. My face stared back at me, unchanged. I exhaled slowly and pulled back onto Route 66. Behind me, the red battery glowed steadily, patient and unblinking. I stopped trusting mirrors somewhere east of Kingman, not all at once, not dramatically. It was a gradual erosion of certainty, the kind that doesn't announce itself, only leaves you with fewer and fewer safe assumptions to stand on. At first, I told myself I was tired. Then I blamed the desert light, the way it flattened features and exaggerated shadows. Eventually, I stopped explaining it at all. I simply stopped looking. The pager rested on the dashboard now, angled toward me like a second instrument panel. The red battery icon never flickered, never dimmed. It felt less like a power indicator and more like an eye open, attentive, unconcerned with time. The next set of coordinates led me to a place that shouldn't have existed. The GPS insisted I had arrived, but the landscape disagreed. The pin hovered over a stretch of land that had been scraped clean, graded flat, as if something had been erased deliberately. No structure, No debris, just dirt packed hard and smooth, the color of old bone. I parked anyway. The pager vibrated before I opened the door. 3 short pulses. A pattern. When I stepped out, the air felt different here, thicker, carrying a faint metallic tang that clung to the back of my throat. I walked the perimeter slowly, camera running out of habit rather than intention, narrating details that felt increasingly performative. Halfway around, my foot struck something solid. I knelt. A fragment of tile, glazed white, its edge cleanly broken. Bathroom tile. The kind used in cheap motels, built fast and torn down faster. I brushed away more dirt with my hand and uncovered another piece. Then another. They formed a line, not scattered. Placed. I followed it. The line ended at a shallow depression in the earth, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. The ground there had settled unevenly, as if something beneath it had collapsed inward long ago. My phone buzzed. No signal, just the vibration. The pager followed immediately after. New coordinates. I didn't check them. I didn't need to. I already knew where it wanted me to go. That night, I didn't bother with a motel. I pulled off the road and slept in the car, the desert stretching out in all directions like a held breath. I cracked the window, letting warm air seep in, carrying the low hiss of wind across sand. The pager vibrated once around 2 a.m. I woke instantly. The screen displayed no coordinates, just a percentage, 98%. I stared at it, heart thudding. That was new. I waited. Nothing else happened. No vibration, no message. The battery remained at 98%, steady and calm, as if reassuring me that this change was intentional. I looked up. The rearview mirror caught my face in the dim interior light. For a moment, I thought everything was fine. Then I noticed the eyes. They were my eyes, same color, same shape, but the expression behind them was wrong. Too still, too observant. They watched me with a focus that made my skin prickle. I reached up slowly and touched my cheek. The reflection followed, but it hesitated, just a fraction of a second too late. I turned away, pressing my forehead against the steering wheel, breathing hard. The smell of old upholstery and dust filled my lungs, grounding me in something tangible. When I looked again, the mirror showed me as I expected. I did not feel relieved. The next site was marked nowhere online. No articles. No cold case threads. No comments sections filled with speculation and half-remembered facts. The coordinates led to a drainage culvert beneath the highway, the kind you only notice when you're not supposed to be there. I crawled inside with a flashlight, the concrete cold and damp beneath my hands. The air smelled stale, tinged with something organic that had long since dried out. Graffiti layered the walls, names and dates and crude drawings overlapping in chaotic strata. Halfway through, I found the shoes. They were tucked against the wall, toes pointed inward, laces still tied. A woman's shoes, scuffed and sun-bleached, soles worn thin. No footprints nearby, no other belongings. The pager vibrated. The battery dropped again, 96%. My reflection stared back at me from a shallow pool of water near the culvert's edge. The face in the water was not quite right anymore. The jawline seemed softer. The eyes sat differently in the skull. Subtle changes, easy to dismiss if you weren't looking closely. I was looking closely. The realization arrived, fully formed, heavy, and undeniable. The pager wasn't leading me to the victims. It was preparing me. Each location stripped something away. Not from the land, but from me features, expressions, habits of movement. With every mile, the face I wore became less specific, more adaptable, more available. I stumbled out of the culvert, gulping fresh air, wiping my hands on my jeans as if that could remove the feeling crawling up my arms. The pager vibrated again, 95%. A message appeared beneath the numbers, almost ready. I dropped the device onto the passenger seat like it had burned me. As I drove, the road stretched on, indifferent and patient. The yellow lines blurred together, the horizon swallowing itself over and over again. In the mirror, my face watched the road with practiced calm. It looked like someone who knew exactly where they were going, I noticed the heartbeat first because it wasn't mine. I was driving through a stretch of road so straight it felt theoretical, the headlights carving a narrow tunnel through darkness that refused to end. The radio had given up miles ago, reduced to a soft hiss no matter where I turned the dial. The engine hummed steadily, tires whispering against asphalt worn smooth by decades of repetition. Then something pulsed. Not the car, not the road, the pager. It vibrated once, a clean, deliberate beat. A second later, my chest answered. I eased my foot off the accelerator, the car slowing almost on its own. My hand hovered near the dashboard, fingers trembling as I watched the pager. Another vibration, another beat in my chest. They matched perfectly. I pressed my palm against my sternum, feeling the rhythm there steady, familiar, usually comforting. But now it felt borrowed, like a metronome someone else had set and forgotten to turn off. The pager's screen lit up. 93%. Below it, a thin line appeared, stretching across the display. With each vibration, the line pulsed faintly, brightening and dimming in time with my heart. I pulled over. The car rolled to a stop on the shoulder, gravel crunching softly beneath the tires. The desert opened around me, vast and indifferent, stars burning cold and sharp overhead. I killed the engine and sat in the sudden quiet, listening. The pager vibrated. My heart followed. I tried to slow my breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The techniques I'd used on long drives, before big shoots, before talking to crowds. The pager adjusted. The rhythm changed to match. No, I whispered. The word sounded small in the open air, barely audible even to me. The pager vibrated again, 92%. I understood then that it wasn't reacting to me. I was reacting to it. The next coordinates appeared without warning. They pointed forward, not off the highway, not into the desert, straight ahead. The pin dropped onto a section of Route 66 I was already on, a stretch I had driven before without noticing anything unusual. No markers, no records, no documented crime scenes. Yet, I drove. What else was there to do? As the miles passed, the changes became harder to ignore. My hands on the steering wheel felt unfamiliar, not numb, but distant, as if the instructions to move them traveled through an extra layer of delay. My reflection in the rearview mirror had settled into something disturbingly calm. The face looking back at me blinked, less often. Its expressions arrived too slowly, like they were being translated from another language before appearing. At a red light in a small, nearly abandoned town, I caught sight of myself in a shop window. The glass reflected me alongside the car, the street, the flickering neon sign above. For a split second, there were two faces. One overlapped the other imperfectly, features misaligned like frames in a damaged video file. One face was mine as I remembered it, tense, alert, afraid. The other was smoother, emptier. Its eyes held a practiced vacancy I recognized from the photographs I'd studied online. Victims. People captured in the last available image before something erased them from the present tense. The light turned green. I drove on. The coordinates ended at a motel, or what remained of one. A long, low building crouched beside the road, its sign missing letters, leaving behind a word that no longer made sense. The parking lot was empty. Cracked asphalt, sprouting weeds, curtains hung behind grimy windows, some drawn, some torn away entirely. The pager vibrated twice. 90%. I parked. The air here felt expectant, as if the place had been waiting, holding itself together out of habit rather than purpose. I walked toward the office, shoes scuffing against concrete, each step echoing too loudly. Inside, the front desk was coated in dust. A bell sat near the edge, its metal dulled, fingerprinted by time. Behind it, a wall of key hooks stood mostly empty. One key remained. It hung alone at the far end, its tag yellowed and cracked. Room 6. The pager vibrated. My heart answered. I reached for the key, the moment my fingers closed around it. The pager's battery dropped again. 89%. A memory surfaced then, not mine, but close enough to pass. A woman standing in this same office decades earlier, arguing softly with someone just out of sight. A man leaning against the door frame, blocking the exit without touching her. The sound of a car idling outside. Impatient, I staggered, gripping the counter. The memory receded, leaving behind a residue of fear that didn't belong to me but fit me disturbingly well. I understood the pattern now. Each location hadn't just taken something away, it had given something back. Fragments, impressions, the emotional weight of endings that had never been properly witnessed. The pager vibrated again, 88%. I walked down the exterior corridor, past doors swollen with age, paint peeling like old scabs. Room 6 waited near the end, its door slightly ajar. The mirror beside it caught my reflection. The face staring back no longer tried to pretend. It wasn't mine, not entirely, but it fit. And as I pushed the door open, heart beating in perfect time with the red glow in my hand, I knew with terrible certainty the pager wasn't losing power. It was finishing the transfer. The door to room 6 closed behind me without a sound, not because it was gentle, but because the hinges no longer needed to announce themselves. The room accepted me the way lungs accept air without question, without pause. Dust motes drifted lazily through the beam of light spilling in from the parking lot, suspended like they were waiting for permission to settle. The smell hit me a second too late. Old carpet, stale fabric, something metallic beneath it all, faint but persistent, like the memory of blood long after it has dried. I stood still, letting my eyes adjust, letting the space finish arranging itself around me. The room was smaller than it looked from outside. A single bed pressed against the far wall, its mattress sagging inward at the center, sheets tucked tight with a care that felt intentional rather than abandoned. A nightstand leaned slightly to one side, its drawer half open. On the opposite wall, a mirror hung crookedly, its surface clouded but intact. The pager vibrated, 87%. The number felt ceremonial now. I didn't check the camera. I didn't narrate. The habits that had once defined me had grown quiet, distant, like accents fading after too much time away. I crossed the room slowly, each step measured, aware of how naturally my body moved here, as if it remembered the space. The mirror caught me mid-step. I stopped. The face staring back was no longer shifting. No flicker. No hesitation. The features had settled into something final, eyes dulled to a familiar vacancy, mouth relaxed in a way that suggested surrender rather than peace. I recognized the face, not from photographs, from the pager, from the articles, the grainy stills, the missing persons reports that ended without conclusions. The expression was identical across decades of unresolved cases. The look of someone whose story had been interrupted mid-sentence. I raised my hand. The reflection followed perfectly. The pager vibrated again, 86%. A sound came from the bathroom. Water, not running, dripping, slow, steady. Each drop landing with a soft, patient tap that echoed too clearly in the small room. I turned toward it without thinking, drawn by a familiarity that wasn't mine but felt close enough to borrow. The bathroom light flickered when I switched it on. The sink was stained. The mirror above it cracked, the fracture running diagonally across the glass like a fault line. Beneath the sink, something had been shoved hastily out of sight. I knelt, a bundle of fabric. Old clothes, folded once, then abandoned. A jacket I recognized from one of the case photos. Shoes with worn soles. Personal effects, stripped of context, reduced to proof. The pager vibrated, 85%. My heart beat in time. I stood, turning back toward the bedroom. The bed was no longer empty. Someone lay there now, not sleeping, waiting. The body was arranged carefully atop the covers, hands folded at the chest, eyes closed. The face was calm, composed, already distant from the urgency of living. I knew that face too. It was the one I had been wearing. My knees weakened, but I didn't fall. The pager vibrated one final time. The screen changed. No percentage, no coordinates, just words. You have arrived. Below it, smaller text appeared. Latitude, longitude. They matched exactly where I stood. Room 6, Route 66. Here, the red battery icon faded not to black, but to clear. empty, yet somehow complete. The device grew warm in my hand, then still. I understood then what the pager had been. Not a guide, not a recorder, a baton, passed carefully, patiently, from one unresolved ending to the next. Each holder finishing what the last could not, being present at the moment the story stops. The mirror across the room reflected the scene with perfect indifference. A body on the bed, a man standing beside it, face already losing specificity. Outside, a car passed on the highway, headlights sweeping briefly across the cracked window, illuminating the room just long enough to confirm what it needed to know. Then it moved on. The room settled. The pager slipped from my fingers, clattering softly onto the carpet. I didn't bend to pick it up. There was no one left to hand it to. Not yet. Somewhere down the road, another rest stop waited. Another forgotten object sat untouched, and another battery, fully charged, prepared to begin again. The unfinished will. The house learned the music before any of us did. That was the thought that returned to me years later, long after lawyers had finished arguing and the last piece of furniture had been cataloged, tagged, and hauled away. Long after we stopped pretending the past could be divided cleanly, like silverware or land deeds. But on that first night when the earth over my father's grave was still loose, and the air inside the mansion smelled faintly of extinguished candles, we did not yet understand what the house had taken upon itself to remember. The estate sat on a low hill in coastal New England, its windows facing a stand of old trees that had learned how to endure winter without complaint. The locals referred to it by the family name, though none of them could recall exactly when the house had first been built. It had always been there, in their stories, always watching the weather arrive. Inside, everything sounded louder, footsteps carried too far down the halls. Doors closed with a finality that felt personal. Even breathing seemed amplified, as though the walls were trained to notice the smallest disruptions in their long, careful listening. We gathered there after the funeral because tradition insisted upon it, because the will was unfinished. My father had been a composer before he was anything else, before he was wealthy, before he was difficult, before silence became the most reliable way he communicated with us. Music had shaped the architecture of his thinking. He spoke in movements rather than sentences, expected people to understand tension and release the way musicians do. He had written symphonies no one ever heard. Not because they were bad, on the contrary. Critics who glimpsed fragments described them as unsettlingly precise, but because my father never considered them complete. He revised obsessively, rewriting passages late into the night, pages spreading across the grand piano in the east wing like fallen leaves. The last piece occupied him for years. He called it the will, though whether that was irony or intent, we never knew. When he died suddenly, quietly, in his sleep, the manuscript was still unfinished, and yet, in his final instructions, delivered through a trembling attorney who looked far too young to be responsible for such gravity, my father made one request with absolute clarity. He wanted the music buried with him, not recorded, not archived, not performed, buried. We ignored him, not openly, not at first. Grief wears many disguises, and ours wore practicality. The manuscript, after all, was valuable, historically significant, a final work by a reclusive composer whose reputation had only grown with his absence. Museums had already expressed interest before the soil had settled on his grave. My siblings framed it as preservation. I knew better. The house knew better. The night we signed the agreement with the museum, the piano played for the first time. It was just after midnight. I lay awake in my childhood room, listening to the house settle, to the soft whistle of wind slipping through the gaps in the windows. Somewhere below me, wood creaked as it always had, a language of age and weight. Then, a note sounded, low, measured, out of place. It came from the east wing. I sat up, heart thudding not with fear, but with a strange recognition. I knew the piano's voice as well as I knew my father's moods. That instrument had been chosen carefully, tuned obsessively, protected like a living thing. No one had touched it since the funeral. Another note followed, then another. The melody that emerged was familiar, but wrong. Intervals misjudged. harmonies that slid just slightly out of alignment, like a memory recalled incorrectly. The music stumbled forward, uncertain, correcting itself too late. I listened, frozen, as the house filled with sound that should not have existed. The music did not crescendo. It did not resolve. It simply stopped, and in the silence that followed, I heard something else, a sound not carried through air, but through structure, a low, distant scream rising from beneath the ground, vibrating up through stone and foundation and bone. I pressed my hands over my ears. It didn't help. By morning, my brother complained that the house felt muted. By afternoon, my sister said the birds outside had gone quiet. By nightfall, none of us could hear the piano anymore, but the screaming never stopped. My brother lost the lower frequencies first. He noticed it over breakfast, sitting at the long dining table beneath the chandelier that had always hummed faintly when the house cooled overnight. He complained that the kettle sounded wrong, too thin, like steam without weight. When the grandfather clock in the hall chimed 8, he frowned, counting on his fingers. "It skipped," he said. "Did you hear that? It skipped the bass." None of us answered, not because we couldn't hear it, but because we all had. The sound had been incomplete, as if someone had reached into the middle of it and removed a vital organ. By noon, my brother couldn't hear the rumble of passing trucks on the distant road. By evening, his own voice sounded foreign to him, too sharp, too exposed. He spoke more quietly after that, as though afraid of shattering something fragile in the air. The doctor we called arrived skeptical and left unsettled. "No physical cause," he said, glancing around the room as if expecting an explanation to present itself in the furniture. "Selective loss like this, it's highly unusual." The piano played again that night. We didn't hear it, not at first. We felt it. A vibration traveled through the floorboards, subtle enough to ignore if you weren't paying attention. Glassware trembled in its cabinets. The chandelier responded with a soft, sympathetic sway. The house leaned into the sound, like an old body, remembering how to move. When the notes finally reached us, they arrived, distorted, warped by whatever was happening inside our ears. The melody limped forward, its structure recognizable but damaged, like a face glimpsed through uneven glass. My sister covered her ears and began to cry. She said the music tasted wrong. The lawyer called the next morning to confirm the transfer. The museum had already begun restoration work on the manuscript. Infrared scans, conservation protocols. They were thrilled, he said. The piece was more complex than anticipated. Unusual materials. Evidence of multiple revisions layered over one another. He was obsessed, the lawyer said fondly. Right up to the end. I imagined my father at the piano, hands stained with ink, correcting a passage that refused to settle. Listening not for beauty, but for accuracy. That afternoon, my sister stopped hearing altogether. At least, that's how she described it. "There's a pressure," she said, pressing her palms to her ears. "Like something's still there, screaming, but I can't hear it anymore. I can only feel where it should be." She could still hear one thing. At night, when the house went still and the air cooled, she said the screaming grew clearer, not louder, but more precise. As if whatever lay beneath us was learning how to aim. She began sleeping with the lights on. None of us slept much after that. The piano's performances grew longer, more confident. Entire movements unfolded in the dark, their wrongness accumulating rather than resolving. The music tried again and again to reach something just beyond its grasp, correcting mistakes only to introduce new ones. We searched the house, every room, every corridor. The piano lid was closed, the keys cold beneath our fingers. No recordings played, no hidden speakers. The instrument remained stubbornly inert, and yet, the music continued. It did not echo. It emanated from the walls, from the floor, from the spaces between rooms. The house had learned to score. I was the last to begin losing my hearing. It started with the high notes. Birdsong vanished from the mornings. The wind through the trees outside became a silent gesture. I noticed only when I saw branches moving without sound, leaves shaking as if in a private conversation I could no longer join. But the screaming cut through everything. It was no longer distant. It no longer rose from the ground. It came from inside the walls, vibrating through plaster and wood, pressing against my skull from all sides. It carried no words, only intention, a raw, unfiltered demand that did not require language. My father was not angry. He was unfinished. On the fourth night, the piano played something new, a passage I had never heard before. It was slower, careful, almost tender. The wrong notes were still there, but fewer now, as if the music were learning from its mistakes, completing itself. I stood alone in the east wing, hand resting on the piano's closed lid, feeling the vibration travel up through my arm. I understood then what the silence was for. Not punishment, preparation. The house was clearing space, and whatever came next would require us to listen with something other than ears. Silence did not arrive all at once. It segmented itself. What my brother lost first, my sister lost last. What vanished entirely for her lingered faintly for me, distorted but persistent, like a frequency that refused to accept eviction. We discovered this by accident, sitting in the drawing room one afternoon. The three of us arranged too carefully around the cold hearth. The house breathed. I felt it through the soles of my feet, an almost imperceptible oscillation, as if the floor itself were rising and falling. My brother looked up sharply, eyes narrowing, his head tilting in a way that reminded me of how our father used to listen for mistakes. "You feel that?" he asked. I nodded. My sister shook her head. "I don't hear anything," she said. She didn't hear it, but her hand was clenched around the arm of the chair, knuckles white, reacting to something her body recognized, even as her ears denied it. That was how we learned the truth. The music had not disappeared. It had redistributed itself. That night, the piano played in sections, not movements, not themes, fragments. Each of us received a different portion. My brother heard rhythm without melody, a relentless, percussive structure that pounded behind his eyes. He said it felt like being trapped inside a clock that had forgotten how to stop. Every second arrived with equal insistence. No variation, no mercy. My sister heard harmony without pitch. She described it as pressure rather than sound, chords pressing against her chest, stacking weight upon weight until breathing became an act of resistance. She slept sitting upright, afraid that lying down would collapse something essential. I heard melody without time, notes stretched and folded, overlapping themselves, arriving out of order. A phrase would begin before the last had finished, like a thought interrupting itself mid-sentence. It was familiar and alien at once, something I knew intimately but could not place. We compared notes with gestures, with writing, with the strained expressions of people trying to describe a color they could no longer see. Each attempt left us more unsettled. The parts did not align. They could not be assembled into a whole, not without something else. The screaming changed. It gained structure. What had once been raw, directionless anguish began to sharpen, its edges defined by the emerging music. The sound, if it could still be called that, rose and fell in deliberate patterns, aligning itself with the fractured score the house was performing. I followed it one evening, tracing the vibration through the corridors, down the narrow staircase that led to the lower level. The air grew colder with each step, the smell of earth and old stone thickening until it coated the back of my throat. The sound did not come from the piano. It came from below the house, from the ground itself. The cellar door resisted when I tried to open it, the wood swollen with age. When it finally gave way, the hinge screamed a sound so sharp and complete it startled all of us. For a brief, terrible moment, the world snapped back into alignment. Then it faded again. The cellar was empty. No instruments, no hidden speakers, just stone walls, packed earth, and the faint outline of where something heavy had once rested. I pressed my palm to the floor. The vibration was strongest there, directly above my father's grave. The museum called again. This time, their tone had changed. There were questions now, concerns. The manuscript, they said, was proving difficult to catalog. The materials were unconventional. The ink behaved strangely under examination, absorbing light in ways that defied standard analysis. One of the conservators had complained of ringing in her ears. Another had resigned without explanation. "They want to know more about his process," the lawyer said carefully. Anything we can provide. Well, guide. I hung up without answering. That night, the house played the most complete version of the symphony yet. The wrong notes were fewer, the structure tighter. The fragments we each perceived began to align not into harmony, but into purpose. The rhythm my brother felt began to dictate our movements. The pressure my sister endured shaped the air in the room. The melody I heard threaded through it all, binding the parts together with a terrible inevitability. We stood in the east wing, the three of us, hands pressed to the piano lid as if performing a ritual we had not consented to. The screaming beneath us resolved into something almost intelligible. Not words, not language, but intent. Finish it. I dreamed of my father that night. He stood at the piano, hands resting on the keys, his face obscured by shadow. When he played, his fingers did not strike ivory, but something softer, darker, yielding under pressure. The sound was perfect. When I woke, my hand smelled faintly of iron. The manuscript arrived back at the house in pieces. Not all of it, just enough. The museum did not say why they returned those pages. They framed it as a request for clarification, an attempt at collaboration. Their letter was formal, apologetic, threaded with the kind of unease professionals develop when something resists classification. The package was heavier than it should have been. When I cut it open at the long dining table, the sound of the blade sliding through tape echoed too loudly in the room. My brother stood nearby, hands clasped behind his back, jaw tight. My sister sat at the far end of the table, eyes unfocused, listening to something none of us could hear anymore. The pages inside were not paper, not entirely. They were thin, flexible, uneven at the edges, pale, but not white. When I lifted the top sheet, it bent with a resistance that felt organic, reluctant. Skin. I dropped it. The page landed on the table with a sound that was neither paper nor flesh, but something caught between the two. The notation inked across it was dark and irregular, the lines pressed deep enough to leave impressions on the surface beneath. My father's handwriting. Precise, elegant, unmistakable. My brother reached for the page, then stopped short, as if something in the air warned him away. My sister leaned forward instead, fingertips hovering just above the surface. "It's warm," she said. The screaming surged, not louder, closer. The vibration beneath the floor intensified, the stone responding like a drum struck from below. The house seemed to inhale, holding the sound within its frame. We learned the truth in fragments. The museum's conservators had discovered it first, though they never put it in writing. The materials used in the manuscript did not match any known medium. Chemical analysis failed. Biological testing returned contradictory results. The pages resisted decay, resisted classification, resisted being fully photographed. One conservator had tried to clean a stain from the margin. She lost her hearing that afternoon. My father had not written the symphony for performance. He had written it into something. Each revision was not an edit, but a replacement. Each discarded draft was not thrown away, but repurposed. The final version, the one he wanted buried, contained more than music. It contained him, or what remained after obsession stripped away everything else. The house could no longer contain the sound. Cracks appeared along the cellar walls, hairline fractures widening with each night's performance. The earth beneath the foundation shifted, settling unevenly, as though something below were testing the limits of its enclosure. We stood in the cellar when it happened. The floor split with a sound I felt more than heard, a deep rupture that sent dust raining down from the ceiling. A narrow fissure opened directly above the grave, its edges crumbling inward. The screaming changed pitch. For the first time, it resembled a voice, not speaking, singing. My sister collapsed to her knees, hands pressed to her chest. "It's missing something," she gasped. "It can't finish, not without the rest." She was right. The fragments returned from the museum were incomplete. Measures missing, pages withheld. The symphony could not resolve itself with only what we had. That was the cruelty of it. To end this, we would have to retrieve the rest. The piano lid opened on its own that night, the keys depressed without hands, the instrument finally allowed to participate fully. The music that emerged was almost correct now, its wrongness narrowed to a single agonizing dissonance that refused to disappear. My brother wept not from fear, but from recognition. "I know this part," he said hoarsely. He played it for me once, said it needed sacrifice. The house shuddered. Outside, the ground above the grave bulged upward, soil shifting as if something were turning beneath it, searching for alignment. The manuscript on the table pulsed faintly, the pages flexing in subtle rhythm. The music wanted its body back, and to give it that, we would have to acknowledge what our father had truly left us, not an inheritance, but an unfinished self. We did not retrieve the remaining pages from the museum. They came to us, one by one. The first arrived by courier, wrapped in conservation paper and sealed with a note written in a hand that shook too much to be professional. The sender apologized for the condition, for the smell, for the delay. The page inside was smaller than the others, the edges irregular, as if cut to fit a space rather than measured. Skin, older than the rest. The notation pressed into it formed a bridge passage necessary, transitional, the kind of writing my father obsessed over. Without it, the symphony stalled. With it, the music advanced. That night, the piano played without error. The wrong notes were gone. For the first time since the funeral, the house fell quiet between phrases, allowing silence to exist without pressure. The screaming beneath the floor softened, stretching into something that resembled breath taken for the sake of phrasing rather than pain. My brother regained a sound, just one, the low C. It rang through him with such force, he staggered, hand pressed to his chest, eyes wide. Tears ran down his face, unbidden. "It's almost done," he whispered. He did not realize he was whispering. The second package arrived at dawn. No return address, no apology. The page inside was newer, the skin paler, the notation heavier, the ink driven deeper as if to ensure permanence. The movement it completed carried a weight that bent the air around it, harmonies resolving with a finality that left no space for doubt. The house exhaled. The ground beneath us shifted, not violently, but decisively. The fissure in the cellar sealed itself, stone grinding against stone until no seam remained. The screaming ceased, not faded, ceased. My sister stood very still in the east wing, head tilted, listening. "I can hear him," she said softly. Not screaming, counting. She smiled then, a small, private expression. He always did that before the end. The last pages arrived together, 3 sheets, bound with twine that had darkened unevenly, fibers stiff and glossy in places. We did not unwrap them at the table. We carried them to the piano, hands gloved, breath shallow. When we laid them atop the keys, the instrument responded at once, not with sound, with alignment. The manuscript settled, each page adjusting minutely, edges fitting together with an ease that suggested they had always known where they belonged. The notation flowed across them uninterrupted now, the final movement revealed in its entirety. There were no margins, no corrections, just a complete, unbroken will. We understood then. The music had not been written on skin. It had been written from it. Each page was a consented offering, a piece removed carefully, deliberately, over years. The work of a man who believed that to be complete, something must be given up in full. My father had not wanted the symphony buried because it was unfinished. He had wanted it buried because it was finished, and it was not meant to be heard. The piano played itself, not loudly, not triumphantly. The final movement unfolded with restraint, each note placed exactly where it belonged. The house did not shake. The walls did not bleed. The air simply accepted the sound, holding it long enough for completion to occur. As the last chord resolved, the manuscript darkened. The pages curled inward, edges drawing together, the surface tightening until the notation vanished beneath a smooth, unmarked plane. The skin hardened, thickened, becoming something else. When the piano fell silent, there was no echo, only a sense of something finished, closed with care. My brother sat heavily on the bench, his hearing returning unevenly, painfully. My sister leaned against the wall, exhausted but whole. They stood at the piano, hands resting where my father's had rested 1,000 times before. For the first time, the house did not listen. We buried what remained that afternoon. No headstone, no marker. The ground accepted it easily. That night, the mansion slept, and for the first time since my father began composing his final work, there was no music in the walls, only silence. Complete, intentional, earned, the silver toll. The fog arrived without warning. One moment the road was open, narrow, wet, familiar in the way Scottish highways always are, and the next it folded inward, compressing distance until headlights could barely reach beyond the bonnet. The world shrank to a tunnel of white and gray, sound dampened, edges erased. Anna slowed instinctively. "Was this here before?" she asked. Mark leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. The wipers moved steadily, brushing mist aside only for it to settle again, thicker each time. Ahead, a structure emerged from the fog in pieces. A reflective post, then another, then the low, horizontal shape of a barrier arm. A toll booth that made no sense. Scotland had its share of remote roads, of course single-lane stretches that twisted through moorland and hills, but toll booths were relics. Phased out, removed, turned into trivia questions and forgotten infrastructure. And yet, there it stood, a single automated lane, its lights dimmed to a dull amber glow. No attendants, no signage they could read through the fog. Just a card reader mounted on a metal pillar, blinking patiently. Mark eased the car forward. The barrier remained down. The silence pressed in around them, broken only by the soft tick of the engine cooling and the distant hiss of fog moving over asphalt like breath across glass. Anna reached into her bag and pulled out her bank card. "This must be temporary," she said, more to reassure herself than him. "Road works or something." She leaned out the window, slid the card into the reader. A tone sounded, flat, final, declined. She tried again, same tone, same word, displayed briefly on the small screen before vanishing back into blankness. Mark handed her his card without a word. Declined. The barrier did not move. Fog pressed closer, curling around the car, swallowing the road behind them until the direction they'd come from no longer felt real. "That's not possible," Mark muttered. "There's money in that account." Anna nodded, irritation creeping in. "Mine too." She reached for her phone. No signal. Not even the hollow suggestion of one. The toll booth speaker crackled. The sound was soft, almost apologetic, but it cut through the fog with unsettling clarity. "Payment required." Anna froze. The voice was genderless, accentless, not synthetic enough to be a machine, not human enough to feel comforting. It sounded like something imitating instruction without fully understanding it. Mark swallowed. "There must be an error. Our cards aren't working." A pause. Then, "Card payment unavailable." The speaker hummed faintly, as if considering an alternative. "Alternate payment accepted." Anna felt a chill slide down her spine. "Alternate payment?" Another pause. Longer this time. The fog shifted, thickened, pressing against the windows as though curious. "Payment may be rendered in silver." Mark frowned. "Silver? We don't..." Or equivalent. The barrier's lights flickered. Anna laughed once, short and sharp. "Equivalent to what?" The speaker responded immediately. "The memory." Silence flooded the car. Mark turned to look at her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. The fog outside seemed to lean closer, listening. "That's not funny," he said quietly. "Humor is not accepted as payment," the voice replied. The card reader's screen lit again, waiting, expectant. Anna's eyes drifted to her left hand. The ring caught the dull amber glow from the booth lights, its silver surface reflecting a distorted version of her face. She twisted it absent-mindedly, a nervous habit she hadn't noticed herself developing. Mark followed her gaze. "No," he said immediately. "Absolutely not." The speaker crackled again. "One object, one memory." The fog thickened further, swallowing the edges of the booth until it seemed to float in nothingness. Behind them, the road was gone. Ahead, the barrier waited. And somewhere in the silence between breaths, Anna realized with a slow, creeping dread that the voice already knew what they would choose. They argued quietly at first, not shouting, not pleading, just the low, tense exchange of two people who still believed reason might apply here. Anna kept her hand closed around the steering wheel, knuckles pale. Mark leaned back in his seat, jaw set, eyes fixed on the barrier as if staring it down might convince it to lift. "It's a trick," he said. "Some kind of prank. Or a malfunction." The fog pressed closer, dulling the edges of the booth until even its light seemed hesitant. The speaker remained silent, waiting. Anna exhaled slowly. "If it is a malfunction, then we're stuck. And if it's not..." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Mark shook his head. "We don't give it anything. Especially not." He gestured vaguely between them. "That." The card reader chimed softly. A reminder. Anna glanced at the dashboard clock. The numbers hadn't changed. Not frozen, just uncertain. Like they couldn't quite agree on the time. She reached into the center console instead. Her fingers brushed past receipts, lip balm, loose coins. Then they closed around something small and familiar. A photograph. She held it up between them. It was creased at the corners, the colors slightly faded. A picture of the two of them taken years ago, back when everything felt provisional rather than permanent. They were standing near the coast, wind pushing Anna's hair across her face. Mark laughing at something just out of frame. Mark frowned. "That's nothing. Just paper." The speaker crackled immediately, as if offended. "Object accepted. Memory required." Anna swallowed. "It's just a photo," she said, more to herself now. "I remember that day perfectly." She did. The smell of salt. The way Mark had complained about the cold. The sound of waves striking rock in a steady, comforting rhythm. She leaned out of the window and placed the photograph into the small metal tray beneath the card reader. The tray slid inward with a soft mechanical sigh. The booth lights brightened. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Anna felt it. Not pain, absence. It was subtle enough that she almost missed it, like realizing a room is quieter than it was a second ago, without being able to name what sound has stopped. A thin thread pulled loose somewhere behind her eyes, leaving a smooth, featureless space in its place. She blinked. "Okay," she said. "That's done. See? Nothing happened." "And friend," Mark nodded, relief loosening his shoulders. "Right. Good. That's it then." The barrier did not lift. The speaker spoke again. "Insufficient payment." Anna frowned. "You said one object. One memory." A pause. "Minimum toll not yet met." Mark stared at her. "What memory?" She hesitated. "I don't know," she said slowly. "It took the photo. That's all." But as she said it, something tugged at her attention. She looked at Mark more closely. Something about his face felt unfinished. Not wrong, just slightly unfamiliar, like seeing a coworker outside of work for the first time and struggling to place them. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, a fraction too quickly. "Yeah, of course." But when he smiled the same smile she'd seen 1,000 times, it didn't land the way it usually did. It felt like watching a gesture without knowing the joke that made it meaningful. The fog shifted. The speaker hummed again. "Additional payment required." Mark reached into his pocket, movements sharp with frustration. "Fine, take this." He pulled out his wallet and removed his wedding ring. Anna's breath caught. "Mark, it's metal," he said. "Silver. That's what it wants, right?" He didn't look at her as he placed the ring into the tray. The tray accepted it immediately. This time, the absence was louder. Mark winced, pressing a hand briefly to his temple. "That's strange." "What is?" Anna asked. He opened his mouth to answer, paused, his brow furrowed. "I was going to say something," he said, but it slipped away. The barrier shuddered, just a little. Anna felt a cold weight settle in her chest. "Mark," she said carefully, "do you remember our wedding?" He laughed softly. "Of course I do." Relief flooded her. Then he added, uncertain, "It was in summer, wasn't it?" The fog swallowed the road entirely now. The world beyond the booth no longer existed as anything more than a suggestion. The speaker crackled, satisfied, toll partially paid. Anna stared straight ahead, heart pounding. She had the terrible, dawning realization that whatever they were giving up was not being taken at random. It was being taken in order. The barrier lifted by a hand's breadth. Not enough to pass, just enough to promise that it could. Anna stared at the gap beneath it. The thin slice of road visible beyond wet asphalt, fading immediately back into fog. The sight should have been reassuring. Instead, it made the space inside the car feel tighter, as if the air itself had been portioned out too carefully. The speaker remained silent now, waiting again. Mark rubbed his hands together slowly, as if trying to warm them. "Okay," he said. "We're close. Whatever this is, it's almost satisfied." Anna watched his mouth move as he spoke. The words reached her ears without trouble, but their weight felt wrong, lighter, as if meaning had begun to detach from sound. She realized she was trying to remember how his voice usually made her feel, and couldn't. "That ring," she said. "It was important to you." Mark frowned. "Was it?" "Yes. You never took it off. You said it felt..." She stopped. "Felt like what?" The phrase hovered just out of reach, like a lyric she knew she'd sung before but could no longer recall the melody to. Her chest tightened with frustration. Mark studied her face with the same careful attention. "You're looking at me like I've changed." "You haven't," she said automatically, but even as she spoke, she wasn't sure it was true. The fog shifted, thinning briefly near the booth, revealing the dull metal tray again, open, inviting. "Maybe one more thing," Mark said. "Just something small. Get it over with." Anna nodded, though a quiet voice inside her warned her that small no longer meant safe. She reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a hospital wristband. The plastic was brittle with age, the ink faded but still legible. Her name, a date, a ward number. Mark leaned closer. "What's that?" She stared at it. "I don't remember." That, more than anything, frightened her. "This was from something important," she said slowly. "I know it was. I kept it for a reason." Mark hesitated. "Then don't give it." The speaker crackled softly, almost gently. "Memory holds value, proportional to attachment." Anna closed her eyes. She felt the weight of the wristband in her palm, not physical, but emotional. Dense with a significance she could sense without being able to name. Whatever memory it was tied to, it wasn't casual, it wasn't decorative. She placed it in the tray. This time, the absence tore cleanly. She gasped, a sharp intake of breath she couldn't control. The world tilted, colors flattening, depth receding as if a layer of reality had been peeled away. Anna blinked hard. "Mark," she said, and was surprised by how neutral his name sounded in her mouth. "Yes?" He replied immediately. She searched his face for comfort and found none waiting there. "Why do you care if I give it?" she asked. He stared back at her, confusion flickering across his features. Because you're..." He stopped. His mouth closed. He tried again. "Because you matter to me." The words landed, but without roots. Anna nodded slowly. "Do I?" The barrier lifted another inch. The speaker spoke again. Payment approaching sufficiency. They sat in silence for a long time after that. Not the comfortable kind, the kind filled with mental inventory, each of them quietly checking what remained intact. Anna tested herself, like a person wiggling fingers after an accident. She knew how to drive. She knew how to speak. She knew the rules of the road. She knew that the man beside her was important. She did not know why. Mark cleared his throat. "What's your full name?" she answered without hesitation. It sounded correct. "Mine?" he asked. She opened her mouth. Nothing came. The absence hit harder than the loss of any single memory so far. The name wasn't just a label, it was a handle, a way to grasp a person and pull them into focus. "I know it," she said, panic rising. Just give me a second." The fog pressed closer, obscuring the booth lights until they became diffuse halos, floating without anchors. The speaker crackled. Final payment required. Hey. Mark reached for the visor and pulled down the mirror. He looked at his reflection and flinched. Anna followed his gaze. For a moment, she didn't recognize the man in the glass. Not because he looked different, but because she no longer had a stored reference for who he was supposed to be. His face existed only in the present tense, without history, without emotional annotation. He turned to her. Do you remember when we met? Anna searched herself. Found nothing. She shook her head. The barrier lifted fully. The road beyond opened, fog thinning just enough to reveal the continuation of asphalt stretching forward into nothing. The speaker delivered its final instruction. Voice smooth, satisfied. Toll paid. You may proceed. Anna pressed the accelerator. The car rolled forward. As the booth disappeared behind them, she became aware of a new and terrible truth. She was driving with a stranger. They drove in silence. Not because there was nothing to say, but because language had become a tool, without a purpose. Words existed, intact and available, yet none of them connected to anything solid. The road unfurled ahead of them in a narrow ribbon, headlights carving pale shapes into fog that refused to thin any further. Anna kept her eyes forward. Her hands knew the steering wheel. Her feet knew the pedals. Muscle memory remained obedient, even as personal history dissolved. Driving felt easier than looking at the man beside her. The man. She glanced sideways and immediately looked back to the road. There was no fear in her chest, no instinctive alarm. Just a quiet, unnerving neutrality like sharing a train carriage with someone whose presence you neither welcome nor resent. Okay, the man said after a while. His voice was steady, reasonable. Let's establish facts. She nodded, grateful for the structure. Facts. We were in the same car before the toll. Yes. We were arguing, but not violently. No. We agreed on things. At least some things. She hesitated. I think so. He exhaled slowly. That suggests familiarity. Or coincidence. Anna replied. He looked at her again. Longer this time. She felt the weight of his gaze like pressure on the skin. Not intimate. Not threatening, evaluative. What's your name? He asked. She answered. It still came easily. That feels right, she added, uncertain why she felt the need to justify it. He nodded. Good. I recognize that name. Her heart skipped. You do? He frowned. Not personally, but it doesn't feel wrong. That was the best either of them could manage. They drove on. The road signs began to look unfamiliar. Not unreadable, just unhelpful. Distances repeated themselves. Town names appeared twice within the same mile, spelled slightly differently each time, as if the road itself couldn't quite commit to where it was going. Anna checked the fuel gauge. It hadn't moved. Neither had the clock. How long have we been driving? She asked. The man checked his watch, then turned it over, then removed it entirely. I don't know. The fog reflected their headlights back at them, flattening depths until the world felt like a narrow corridor with no sides. Anna's awareness sharpened. Turning inward, she noticed the space between them. Not physical distance, the seats were close enough, but something else. A lack of shared gravity. When she imagined reaching out and touching his arm, the idea carried no emotional context. It would be like touching a stranger's sleeve by accident in a crowded place. She didn't want to. That, somehow, felt worse. They passed a reflective sign and both flinched. In the brief flash of illumination, Anna caught their faces in the side mirror. They looked older, not dramatically, not impossibly, just worn, lines around the eyes that hadn't been there before, a heaviness to the jaw, skin less responsive to expression, like it had been asked to hold too much, too quickly. She reached up and touched her cheek. The sensation was immediate, too immediate. Did you see that? She asked. Yes, he said. They didn't discuss it further. The mirror became a problem after that. Anna avoided it at first, then found herself checking it compulsively, drawn by a need to confirm what she was becoming. Each glance revealed subtle changes, accumulating faster than reason allowed. 5 minutes ago, her hands had looked young. Now they did not. Her knuckles were more pronounced, the skin thinner, veins closer to the surface. She swallowed hard. Something is wrong with time. The man nodded. Or with what we traded. The word traded settled heavily between them. Anna searched herself for regret. She found none. Not because the decision had been correct, but because regret required memory. It needed context. A before and after. All she had now was after. Stretching forward without reference, she wondered, distantly, whether she had loved him. The thought produced no reaction. That frightened her more than grief would have. The road curved gently, and for the first time since leaving the booth, Anna felt something like resistance in the car. The engine strained, sound dull and far away, as though heard through water. "Slow down," the man said. She did. The fog ahead thinned just enough to reveal the suggestion of another structure. Metal, lights, a mirror. Not another booth, just a long stretch of road, bordered by reflective panels on either side, angled inward. Their headlights bounced back at them, fragmenting into dozens of overlapping reflections. Hannah's breath caught. In the mirrors, they were unmistakably older. Not years, decades. The woman driving had gray threaded through her hair, her posture subtly altered by time. The man beside her bore the weight of long decisions etched into his face, eyes dulled by accumulation rather than trauma. They looked like people who had lived a full life together, but without each other. Anna felt something twist inside her, not memory, but recognition without ownership. "That can't be us," she whispered. The man stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. "If it is, we skipped everything that made it mean something." The mirrors slid past them, one by one, each reflection aging them further, by degrees too small to protest, too large to deny. Anna's hands shook on the wheel. She did not know who the man beside her was. She did not know who she had been to him. But she understood now what the toll had taken. Not love, not pain. Time itself had been forced to rush forward, unburdened by memory, collapsing decades into miles, and they were paying it alone. The fog ended without ceremony. There was no thinning, no gradual return of depth or color. One moment the world was compressed into white breath and reflected light, and the next, it opened abruptly into night, clear, starless, vast. The road straightened, asphalt dark and wet beneath the headlights, bordered by fields that stretched away into nothing recognizable. Anna eased off the accelerator. Her hands hurt, not sharply, dully, the kind of ache that comes from years of repetition rather than strain. She became aware of it all at once, the way you notice age only when it has already settled in. They drove in silence for another minute, then she pulled over. The car rolled to a stop on the shoulder with a tired sigh, engine ticking softly as it cooled. The sound felt intimate now, like something she had heard every night for a long time. Anna turned off the ignition. The sudden quiet pressed in, heavier than the fog had been. She reached up and flipped down the visor. The mirror caught her face cleanly in the interior light. She stared. The woman looking back was old enough to have learned restraint. Lines bracketed her mouth, not cruelly, but with the familiarity of long-held expressions. Her eyes were sharp, observant, no longer searching for permission. Strands of silver threaded through her hair without apology. She lifted a hand. The hand that rose in the mirror belonged to someone who had known decades of mornings, of endings, of habits formed and broken. She did not feel surprise, only a distant curiosity, like encountering a stranger whose life made sense without needing explanation. Anna turned to the passenger seat. The man beside her sat very still. His shoulders sloped forward slightly, posture shaped by time rather than tension. His face bore the marks of decisions layered upon decisions, the kind that accumulate quietly until they become visible. He looked out through the windshield, eyes reflecting the road ahead as if expecting it to offer something more. She studied him carefully, objectively. He was not unattractive. There was intelligence in the set of his brow, patience in the way he breathed. The kind of man she might have known, might have trusted, might have loved. But the thought passed through her without attachment. "Are you all right?" she asked. Her voice surprised her. Lower, roughened, worn into usefulness. He turned to look at her, up close. His eyes were kind. "I think so," he said. "Are you?" She considered the question. "Yes," she said. "I think I am." They sat with that answer, letting it exist without qualification. After a moment, he glanced around the car. "Do you know where we are?" She shook her head. "No." "Do you know where we were going?" "No." That, too, seemed acceptable. He nodded slowly, absorbing the information as one might accept weather. "We should probably decide what to do next." Anna looked out at the road. It stretched forward in both directions. Empty, ordinary, unmarked. No signs, no booth, no fog. Just a mile of road disappearing into darkness on either side. She opened the door. Cold night air rushed in, sharp and clean, carrying the faint scent of grass and distant rain. She stepped out, her joints protesting briefly before settling into motion they clearly remembered well. The man followed more slowly, movements careful but practiced. They stood side by side on the shoulder, the car idling behind them like a patient animal. Anna looked at him again. "Do we know each other?" she asked. He searched her face. "I don't think so," he said honestly. She nodded. Somewhere far behind them, beyond a mile of road that no longer belonged to time, a barrier lowered itself. A speaker fell silent, and a toll was marked, paid in full. Anna extended her hand. "My name is Anna," she said. The man hesitated just a fraction of a second, then took it. "Mark," he replied. Their handshake was firm, polite, entirely unremarkable. Two strangers meeting at the edge of a road, both older than they had any right to be. Neither carrying the weight of what had been lost, only the shape of it, pressed invisibly into the years they had been forced to live. All at once, they released each other's hands. The car's engine sputtered, then died. Anna did not turn back. She stepped onto the road and began to walk, choosing a direction at random. Behind her, Mark watched for a moment, then turned and walked the other way. The road accepted both decisions without comment, and the night, indifferent and endless, closed gently around them as it always does after the toll has been paid. The scholar's shadow. The bell rang once, not loud, not urgent, just enough to be acknowledged. Ethan woke with his cheek pressed against polished oak, the grain of the table imprinted faintly on his skin. For a moment, he didn't move. He let the remnants of sleep dissolve on their own, the way he'd trained himself to do during exam weeks, slowly, methodically, without panic. The library smelled exactly as it always did after hours. Dust, old paper, furniture polish. A faint trace of ozone from the overhead lights that never fully went dark. These were reassuring constants. They told him where he was before his eyes did. He sat up. The reading room stretched out in perfect symmetry. Long tables aligned with architectural precision, green shaded lamps glowing softly at even intervals, shelves rising in disciplined rows that vanished into shadow. It was beautiful in the way institutions often are designed not to comfort, but to endure. He checked his watch. The face was blank, not broken, not cracked, blank. No numbers, no hands, just glass reflecting the ceiling. Ethan frowned and turned his wrist, tilting it under the light. The watch remained empty, as if time itself had politely excused itself from the room. "That's odd," he murmured. His voice sounded too loud. The sound did not echo. That was the first thing that unsettled him. He stood and slung his bag over his shoulder, movements stiff from sleeping too long in one position. Around him, the lamps hummed faintly, their light steady and indifferent. "Hello?" he called. Nothing answered. Not footsteps, not the distant rustle of pages, not even the subtle complaints of an old building settling into itself. He walked toward the exit doors. They were closed. Of course they were. He must have slept through closing. That happened sometimes. He'd heard stories students waking to apologetic security guards. Embarrassment. A long walk home in the dark. He reached for the handle. It didn't budge. He tried again. Harder this time. The door remained immovable, as though it had never been intended to open from this side. Ethan exhaled slowly, steadying himself. Panic was inefficient. Panic led to mistakes. He turned toward the security desk. It was empty, not abandoned, unused. The chair was tucked in, the computer screen dark. No personal effects. No half-finished mug of tea cooling by the keyboard. It looked less like someone had stepped away, and more like no one had ever sat there at all. He checked his phone. No signal. No notifications. No time. Just a home screen frozen in neutral compliance. The library, it seemed, had decided not to participate in the outside world. He returned to his table and opened his notebook, flipping it open to reassure himself with something familiar. The pages were blank, not torn out, not erased, blank in the way paper is blank before it has ever been written on. His notes, weeks of careful preparation, marginalia, underlining, diagrams built to hold arguments together were gone without residue. The ink had not faded. It had never existed. Ethan swallowed. He stood and pulled a book from the nearest shelf. A dense academic text he recognized immediately by its binding. He opened it. White pages, perfectly cut, untouched. He tried another, and another. Shelf after shelf yielded the same result. Books reduced to their most basic promise, content withheld. Titles remained on the spines, gold lettering catching the light, but inside there was nothing, except one. It lay on a small lectern near the far end of the room, as if it had been set aside intentionally. Its cover was unadorned, the leather darker than the rest, worn smooth by use. The title was stamped simply, without embellishment, The Diary of Tomorrow. Ethan hesitated. Something in him, an instinct, honed by years of study, recognized this as a problem. Not a mystery. A problem. Problems required solutions. He reached out and opened the book. The first page was already written. The ink was still drying. That was the first detail Ethan noticed. Absurd and precise. The kind of observation his mind defaulted to when it needed something concrete to hold on to. The letters on the page of The Diary of Tomorrow gleamed faintly under the lamp, strokes slightly raised, as if they had been pressed into the paper moments ago. He read the first line. Tomorrow, you will answer the question incorrectly. His stomach tightened. The sentence was written in careful, formal handwriting, no flourish, no personality. It looked like the sort of note a tutor might leave in the margin of an essay. Calm and detached, already certain of the outcome. He turned the page. He will argue that the premise is flawed. You will be wrong. Ethan closed the book. The lamp above him flickered, then steadied. Around him, the library remained unchanged. Rows of shelves, long tables, the quiet hum of institutional endurance. No movement. No witnesses. He told himself this was stress, sleep deprivation, academic pressure. The mind, after all, was capable of elaborate tricks when pushed too far. He had read the papers. He knew the theories. Still, his hand trembled when he opened the book again. A new line had appeared. You have already reopened the book. He snapped it shut. This time, the silence responded, not with sound, but with presence. Ethan felt it before he saw it. A subtle displacement in the air to his left, like the space beside him had been edited poorly, leaving behind a seam. The light from the nearest lamp bent slightly around that seam, refusing to settle properly. He turned slowly. Someone stood there, or something approximating someone. The figure wore the shape of a person in the way a shadow wears the shape of the object that casts it. There was a body, upright and still, dressed in what might once have been a librarian's attire. Dark, conservative, unremarkable. Where the face should have been, there was nothing. Not darkness, not blur. Absence, a smooth, featureless plane where eyes, nose, and mouth were simply not present, as if the concept of a face had been deemed unnecessary for this role. Ethan's mouth went dry. "Excuse me," he said, immediately regretting the politeness. The figure inclined its head slightly. "The examination will proceed," it said. The voice did not come from where the mouth should have been. It seemed to arrive from the surrounding shelves, The tables, the very idea of the room itself distributed, impersonal. "I didn't know there was an exam," Ethan replied. "Examinations do not require foreknowledge," the figure said. "Only participation." It gestured somehow toward the book on the lectern. "The text will provide the questions." Ethan swallowed. "And the answers?" The pause that followed felt measured. "The answers will be assessed." The page turned itself. Ethan watched, helplessly, as the paper lifted and settled, revealing a new entry. Question 1. If a statement about the future alters your behavior in the present, is the statement still predictive, or has it become causal? He recognized the structure immediately. A logic problem. Temporal paradox. Variants of it appeared in philosophy tutorials all the time. He had argued both sides before, even written a paper on it. He felt a flicker of confidence. "Well," he began, "if the statement causes a change, then..." The librarian raised a hand. "Responses must be final." Ethan hesitated. "You mean no discussion?" "No revision," the librarian corrected. "This is not an essay." The diary waited. Ethan exhaled and chose his words carefully. "If the statement changes behavior, then it's causal. It stops being a neutral prediction." The ink shimmered. Then the page bled. Not red, white. The words drained away, leaving behind an empty space where the question had been. The diary closed itself with a soft, disappointed sound. Ethan felt it then, a sensation like paper sliding beneath his skin. He gasped, clutching his left hand as numbness spread through his fingers. The skin there paled rapidly, texture smoothing, losing the subtle imperfections of flesh. He stared in horror as his index finger stiffened, lightening to the same unnatural white as the blank pages surrounding him. When he flexed it, the sound it made was wrong, too soft, too dry. "Incorrect," the librarian said calmly. Ethan backed away, heart hammering. That's a valid answer. There are schools of thought." "Correctness is not a matter of schools," the librarian replied. "It is a matter of alignment." The diary opened again. A new page. Question 2 will follow. Ethan looked down at his hand, at the finger that was no longer entirely his. "How many questions are there?" he asked, voice shaking. The librarian tilted its head, the absence of a face somehow conveying attention. "As many as required." The lamps hummed softly. The shelves seemed closer now, and somewhere, just beyond the edge of the light, Ethan became aware of his shadow stretched long across the floor, moving a fraction of a second slower than he did. Ethan learned to stand very still. Movement, he discovered, encouraged conversion. The first finger had already stiffened into something that resembled a bookmark more than a part of him. When he flexed it too quickly, a faint crease appeared at the knuckle, an unnatural fold that did not fully disappear. He held his hand close to his chest now, cradling it instinctively, as though warmth might persuade it to remember what it used to be. The librarian waited. It did not loom. It did not advance. It simply occupied space with an authority that made distance irrelevant. The diary opened again. Question 2. If a system evaluates truth based on internal consistency alone, what happens to statements that are meaningful but unverifiable within the system? Ethan felt his jaw tighten. He knew this one too. Gödel. Incompleteness. Limits of formal systems. He had underlined these passages in books that were now blank, their knowledge evacuated but not forgotten yet. "They remain meaningful," he said carefully, choosing each word like a weight placed on a scale. "They're true in a broader sense, even if the system can't prove them." The librarian did not interrupt. The diary's page trembled. Ethan waited for the draining, the whitening, the familiar slide of paper beneath skin. Nothing happened. He exhaled sharply. The librarian inclined its head. Response noted. Relief surged through him. Too fast, too bright. That was his mistake. The diary turned the page. Clarification. Define broader. Ethan froze. This wasn't a new question. It was a narrowing. He licked his lips. Broader meaning external context, human interpretation, things the system wasn't designed to capture. The lamps dimmed slightly. The diary did not bleed. Instead, the margin filled, a thin, pale strip appeared along the outer edge of the page, widening slowly, deliberately. Ethan felt a corresponding sensation crawl up his forearm, an encroaching numbness that carried no pain, only inevitability. He watched, horrified, as the skin along his wrist lost its color, texture smoothing, veins fading beneath a uniform, fibrous whiteness. The transformation did not stop at the surface. It sank deeper, stiffening muscle, tightening tendons. "What are you doing?" he whispered. The librarian's voice remained neutral, annotating. Ethan stared at his arm. Words began to appear, not written on his skin but through it, visible beneath the surface like ink pressed from the other side. Small, precise notations, running parallel to the bone, ambiguous terminology, referent unstable. He choked back a sound. "I answered correctly," he said. "You said correctness," the librarian replied. "Is cumulative." The diary closed. Ethan staggered backward, knocking into a chair. It scraped loudly against the floor, the sound shockingly intrusive in the otherwise disciplined quiet. His shadow lagged behind him, stretching and distorting, its edges fraying as if rendered in poor resolution. He caught his reflection in the dark glass of a bookcase. His left arm no longer moved quite right. From the elbow down, it looked less like flesh and more like bound material, pale, matte, faintly textured. The fingers were stiffening into uniform lengths, their joints losing articulation. He realized with sick clarity that the conversion wasn't random. It followed the logic of a book, margins first, annotations next, the body becoming a place where meaning was stored, not lived. The diary opened again. This time, Ethan did not wait for the question. "No," he said, louder than he intended. "This isn't testing logic. You're not evaluating truth. You're..." The librarian raised a hand. "Relevance noted," it said. The diary responded immediately. Question 3. What distinguishes a reader from a text? Ethan's mind raced. This was no longer philosophy. This was ontology. Existence defined by role. He thought of the blank books. The diary that wrote him faster than he could think. The annotations now crawling across his arm, turning him into commentary. "A reader chooses," he said. "A text doesn't. A reader can close the book." The librarian was silent for a long moment. The diary's page remained still. Hope flickered again. Fragile and foolish. Then the ink appeared. Incorrect premise. The whitening surged up his arm, past the elbow, spreading toward the shoulder. Ethan cried out as stiffness seized his joints, his body reconfiguring itself around a new purpose. "Readers are defined," the librarian said calmly, "by their willingness to continue." Ethan's shadow peeled away from his feet. It stretched upward, elongating, thinning, its edges sharpening into something more precise than darkness should allow. For the first time, it did not mirror his movements at all. It stood straight, attentive, like a student waiting to be called upon. The diary turned to the next page. Question 4 pending. Ethan slumped against the table, breathing hard, his body increasingly unfamiliar beneath him. He understood now that the questions were not meant to be answered. They were meant to reassign him, from thinker to material to text. And somewhere deep in the library's architecture, the shelves adjusted minutely, making room. Ethan stopped trying to save his arm. That realization came quietly, without drama. The papered weight had crept past his shoulder now, tightening his sleeve until fabric and skin felt indistinguishable. When he breathed, the stiffness responded, adjusting itself like binding, settling around new pages. If this was a book, then pain was irrelevant. Books did not flinch. He forced his thoughts to slow, to return to first principles, the discipline that had carried him through years of tutorials and examinations. Panic made sloppy arguments. Sloppy arguments were easy to mark down. The librarian stood opposite him, unmoving, its featureless face turned in his direction with what felt uncomfortably like patience. The diary lay open. Question 4. Can a system evaluate the truth of a statement that denies the system's authority to evaluate truth? Ethan almost laughed. A classic. Self-reference. Authority paradox. The sort of question designed not to be solved, but to expose the assumptions of whoever attempted it. He straightened, ignoring the protest from joints that no longer felt entirely jointed. "No," he said clearly. "If the system claims total authority, then a statement denying that authority creates a contradiction the system can't resolve without limiting itself." The diary hesitated, not metaphorically, physically. The page trembled, edges lifting slightly as if caught in a draft that did not exist. The lamps flickered, light stuttering across the tables in uneven intervals. For the first time, the librarian moved. It stepped closer, not walking so much as updating its position. The space between them recalculated in a single, silent adjustment. "Clarify," it said. Ethan felt a sharp, precise pressure in his chest, like a finger pressing between ribs, demanding refinement. "If you accept the statement, you admit your limits," he continued. "If you reject it, you prove its point. Either way, you can't evaluate it without breaking your own rules." Urfer. The diary did not drain. It did not annotate. Instead, a new line appeared beneath the question. Conditional acceptance recorded. Ethan's breath caught. The whitening stopped, not reversed, but paused, like a process awaiting confirmation. Hope rose again, more cautiously this time. "You see," he said, voice shaking despite his effort. "This isn't an exam. It's a contradiction engine. You can't finish it." The librarian tilted its head. "Examinations," it said, "do not require completion." The diary turned pages rapidly now, flipping forward in a blur of white. Ethan glimpsed fragments, future questions, marginal notes, entire sections already allocated space, conclusion pending, subject exhibits resistance, narrative tension elevated. Ethan's shadow moved independently again. It slid across the floor, stretching toward the shelves, elongating until it brushed the base of a bookcase. Where it touched, the blank spines shuddered, titles pressing outward as if eager to be filled. "Stop," Ethan said. "If you already know the outcome, then asking the questions is meaningless." "Incorrect," the librarian replied. "Questions generate material." The diary snapped shut. The sound was final. Ethan felt a shift, not in his body, but in his status. The pressure in his chest released, replaced by a hollowness that felt editorial rather than physical. "You are not being tested," the librarian said. "You are being drafted." The room changed subtly. Not the architecture, but the attention. The library no longer felt like a place Ethan occupied. It felt like a place he was being placed into. Shelves loomed with expectation. Tables waited like paragraphs without sentences. The librarian stepped aside, revealing something Ethan hadn't noticed before. A small chair, child-sized, positioned near the lectern. Empty. The diary reopened. This time, the page was already written. "Tomorrow, the reader will reach the ending. The reader will accept it." Ethan shook his head. "No. If I refuse to continue, you have nothing." The librarian's voice softened not kindly, but gently, the way instructions become gentle when resistance is no longer expected. "Readers are not defined by consent," it said. "They are defined by continuation." Ethan's shadow lifted from the floor. It peeled upward, separating cleanly now, resolving into a darker, sharper silhouette that no longer matched his posture at all. It stepped toward the chair. Saturday. Waited. Ethan understood then what the shadow was. Not absence. Summary. And the diary, patient and meticulous, had already begun writing the last page. Ethan found the exit by accident. Or rather, the idea of an exit presented itself in the only form the library still permitted. A door that had always been there, now suddenly relevant. It stood at the far end of the reading room, identical in wood and proportion to the others, but newly weighted with meaning. The librarian did not stop him. It did not follow. It simply watched, if watching was the correct word for something without eyes, as Ethan crossed the room with uneven steps, his left side heavier now, less cooperative, like a volume that had been rebound too tightly. His shadow did not accompany him. That absence felt deliberate. He reached for the handle. This time, it turned. The door opened onto night. Cold air rushed in, sharp and unmistakably outside. Stone steps descended into a quad washed in moonlight, the familiar geometry of Oxford unfolding with its ancient confidence. Spires, lawns, the distant echo of footsteps that belonged to no one he could see. Ethan staggered out, heart hammering. Behind him, the door closed, not slammed, filed shut. He sat on the steps for a long time. The world felt loud again, whined through trees. The distant murmur of traffic, the hum of life continuing without examination. His phone buzzed insistently in his pocket, flooded with missed notifications that carried timestamps like anchors. Time had resumed. He looked down at his arm. It was flesh again, pale, shaking, real. No annotations, no margins, no paper beneath the skin. A laugh broke out of him, breathless and disbelieving. He pressed his face into his hands and breathed until the night stopped tilting. He was free. Ethan never returned to the library after that. He completed his degree quietly, avoiding late hours, choosing cafes over reading rooms, daylight over lamplight. He stopped pursuing questions that folded in on themselves. He learned to accept conclusions when they arrived, imperfect and provisional. Sometimes, though, when he passed a window at night, he caught his reflection lagging just a fraction of a second behind. Sometimes he dreamed of blank pages, but life continued, which felt like proof. Elsewhere, in a room that did not belong to any university, a book closed softly. The librarian turned the page back and forth once, as if checking the binding, then set it aside on a low table. A child sat opposite, legs dangling from a chair too large for them, eyes wide and attentive. And then what happened? The child asked. The librarian, now with a face, kindly and indistinct in the low lamplight, smiled. That, it said, is where the story ends. The child frowned, but he got out. Workin'? Yes, the librarian replied, opening the book again. He did. It traced a finger down the final paragraph, the words neat and settled. But every book, it continued gently, must be read by someone. The child leaned closer. The librarian began again, voice soft and measured, reading aloud to an eager listener as the shadow beneath the table lengthened, not threatening, not alive, just waiting for the next reader to turn the page. The fourth-floor studio. Jonathan Hale trusted numbers more than memory. That had always been his advantage as an architect. Memory distorted. People revised the past to suit comfort. Numbers, if treated properly, stayed obedient. Floors stacked the way they were drawn. Loads distributed as calculated. Elevators stopped only where they were told to stop, which was why the display unsettled him before the doors ever opened. 3, 4, 5. The indicator hesitated. The elevator slowed, not with urgency, but with reluctance, as if reconsidering an instruction it had already carried out 1,000 times. A soft chime sounded. The doors opened. The display read 4. Jonathan did not step out. He stood inside the elevator, briefcase resting against his leg, listening to the quiet, mechanical breath of the building. He knew this structure intimately. He had overseen revisions, signed off on tolerances, argued over ceiling heights that no one else would ever consciously notice. There was no fourth floor, not in any version of the plans, not in any compromise reached during construction. The numbering jumped by design, 3 floors, a mechanical buffer, then offices, clean, rational, defensible. Yet the corridor beyond the doors existed. It was narrow, but not wrong enough to raise immediate alarm. The walls were finished in modern neutral tones. The lighting was consistent, recessed fixtures placed at mathematically comforting intervals, no flicker, no decay, no dust, a corridor that had been maintained. Jonathan stepped out. The door slid shut behind him. The sound lingered longer than it should have. The studio at the end of the hall announced itself through glass. Jonathan recognized the space before he consciously processed it. Drafting tables, adjustable lamps, pinboards aligned with almost obsessive care, a room meant for thinking in layers, for returning to the same problem until it surrendered. A room like his. He entered slowly. The air inside carried a familiar scent. Graphite, clean paper, the faint electrical tang of lights left on too long. Nothing here suggested abandonment. The desks were clear, but not empty. Paper stacked, pencils sharpened, tools arranged with intent. The silence felt paused. Jonathan took another step. The sound of his shoe arrived late, not echoing, lagging, as if the room had to check with something else before allowing the noise to exist. He frowned and continued toward the windows. The city outside was wrong, not distorted, misaligned. From this vantage point, Jonathan could see floors that should not have been visible. His own office was clearly framed several levels above, the layout unmistakable. The conference room, the glazing detail he had insisted on, the column alignment he had personally adjusted at the last minute. A figure passed behind the glass. Daniel Brooks, structural engineer, same age as Jonathan, runner, never took the stairs. Jonathan lifted his hand instinctively. Daniel did not respond. Instead, Jonathan watched something quietly horrifying unfold. Daniel paused near the window. His shoulders slumped slightly, posture altered by time rather than fatigue. His hair, once uniformly dark, was threaded with gray. The skin at his temples had thinned. His movements carried the subtle caution of someone older. Daniel turned. Jonathan caught his own reflection in the glass. Younger, unchanged, out of sync. Jonathan stepped back from the window, heart pounding not with panic, but with calculation. This was impossible, which meant it was not accidental. His watch vibrated, a calendar reminder. He glanced down. The date was incorrect. Not by hours, not by days, by years. Jonathan's throat tightened. Behind him, the studio seemed to contract not physically, but conceptually, like a space no longer intended to be occupied. The lights hummed with quiet insistence. The desks waited, and beneath the fear, a colder realization took shape. Time was not moving faster around the room. The room was removing him from time's accounting. Somewhere beyond the glass, colleagues were aging. Here, Jonathan remained, but permanence, he knew better than most, was never free. The elevator chimed again, not behind him, somewhere inside the studio. Jonathan Hale understood too late that the fourth floor was not an error in the building. It was an amendment. Jonathan Hale did what he had always done when something refused to make sense. He measured it. The first thing he checked was proportion. He paced the studio carefully, heel to toe, counting steps the way he had learned to do on construction sites before trusting laser tools. 27 steps from the glass wall to the corridor entrance, 12 across the width. The ceiling height, he raised his arm. Fingertips brushing air where concrete should have been, was just under 3 meters. All of it was reasonable. That, more than anything else, disturbed him. Impossible spaces usually announce themselves with extravagance. Angles that hurt the eyes, distances that folded inward, dimensions that refused to agree with the body occupying them. This room committed a subtler offense. It obeyed every rule Jonathan knew except the most important one. It existed. He removed a pencil from one of the desks and marked a small dot on the corner of a drafting table. The graphite left a clean, obedient line. He pressed harder. The wood accepted the pressure. Real materials. He checked the windows again. Outside, the city continued its accelerated life. Clouds drifted with unnatural speed. Cars moved like insects sped up on old film. On the 6th floor, Daniel Brooks crossed the open-plan office carrying a stack of folders. His gait now unmistakably careful. Daniel stopped. Jonathan leaned closer to the glass. Daniel looked directly at the window. Hope flared. Jonathan raised his hand again. Higher this time. Daniel's gaze slid past him. Not through him, around him, as if the space Jonathan occupied simply did not register as containing a person. Daniel frowned slightly, as though something were bothering him, then turned away. Jonathan's reflection in the glass flickered. For a moment, it appeared thinner, less resolved. Jonathan checked his phone again. Still functional. Still full battery. Still no signal. He opened the camera and aimed it at the room behind him. The screen showed an empty studio. No desks. No lamps. No Jonathan Hale. Just a gray rectangle where the 4th floor should not be. His hand shook as he lowered the phone. This wasn't about time. Not exactly. Time was the symptom. What the room was consuming was reference. The elevator chimed again. Jonathan turned. This time, the sound came from a corner of the studio that had not previously held an elevator. Metal doors stood there now, perfectly flush with the wall, their seams so precise they might have always been present. The indicator above them glowed faintly. 4. Jonathan approached slowly. He pressed the call button. Nothing happened. Instead, the drafting lamps brightened. The studio responded not like a space reacting to occupancy, but like a system acknowledging input. Jonathan felt a pressure behind his eyes, subtle but insistent, like eye strain after staring at plans too long. He rubbed his temples and noticed something odd. His reflection in the glass of a nearby cabinet lagged, not by seconds, by attention. The reflection completed movements Jonathan had already finished, like a delayed rendering catching up to real-time input. He spoke, testing the air. Jonathan Hale. The sound arrived distorted, as if the room had to interpolate the name from incomplete data. He tried again, louder. My name is Jonathan Hale. The room did not echo. It absorbed. He returned to the windows. On the 7th floor now, a woman sat at a desk Jonathan had once approved during design review. Her hair was completely white. Her posture stooped. She typed slowly, methodically. Jonathan searched his memory. Her name should have been there. It wasn't. The realization landed hard. The room wasn't just removing him from their timeline. It was removing them from his. A reciprocal erasure. Outside, the building aged. Inside, Jonathan remained suspended, not preserved, but unrecorded, a flaw not yet corrected. Jonathan opened his notebook. The pages were not blank. They were filled with diagrams, not his handwriting, plans for the building revisions he had never approved. Subtle changes, adjustments measured in centimeters, not meters. Entirely defensible on paper, except for one addition, a shaded rectangle between floors, labeled simply, Studio Temporary. Jonathan stared at the word, temporary. He understood then, with cold architectural certainty, what that meant. Temporary spaces were tolerated only until they served their function, and the function of this one was not work. It was removal. The elevator doors slid open. Inside, there were no buttons, just a mirrored wall. Jonathan stepped back instinctively, because for the first time since entering the 4th floor, his reflection did not appear at all. Jonathan Hale tested his name first. He opened his email client, hand steady despite the pressure building behind his eyes. The interface loaded slowly, as if negotiating permission. His inbox appeared new messages, old threads, routine office noise continuing without him. He typed his own name into the search bar. Nothing. No sent mail. No approvals. No calendar invites bearing his signature. Jonathan refined the search. Initials. Project codes he alone had used. A PDF he remembered revising at 2 a.m, redlining a stair detail no one else had caught. The results returned empty. The cursor blinked patiently. Indifferent to his confusion, he opened the company directory, scrolled. Names he recognized passed by junior architects he had mentored, senior partners he had argued with, interns whose desks he had personally assigned. His name did not appear between them. Jonathan leaned back in the chair, wood creaking beneath his weight. Outside the window, the city accelerated further. Day collapsed into evening in minutes. Office lights flickered on and off in rapid succession, like a time-lapse documentary of institutional fatigue. Inside the 4th floor studio, nothing changed. The lamps held their brightness. The air temperature remained stable. Dust did not settle. The room was exempt. Jonathan stood and walked to the pinboard. Blueprints were clipped there now, not originals updates. The building's plans, refined and annotated. Revision numbers advancing into dates Jonathan did not recognize. Small changes accumulated across the sheets. Wall thicknesses adjusted. Circulation paths optimized. Load-bearing elements redistributed. Every revision removed inefficiency. Every revision removed him. His initials, once scattered across margins and approval blocks, had been replaced. Where JH should have been, there was now a blank space, neatly aligned, as though awaiting a signature that would never come. Jonathan felt something loosen in his chest. Not panic, resignation. He knew this process. He had enforced it himself for years. Systems corrected anomalies. People who did not resolve became errors. He approached the glass again. On what must have been the 9th floor by now, a meeting was in progress. Jonathan recognized the room by its proportions. He had designed that too. A younger man stood at the head of the table. He was presenting. Jonathan leaned closer. The man gestured confidently toward a projected slide. Jonathan's slide, the same diagrams, the same sequencing logic, the same argument Jonathan had once spent weeks refining. But the presenter's name appeared at the bottom of the slide. Senior Architect, M. Reeves. Jonathan searched his memory. Nothing. Yet the work was undeniably his. Outside, the meeting ended. People filed out. No one glanced toward the window. Jonathan's reflection in the glass was faint now, edges softening, contrast reduced. It looked like a preliminary render, present enough to suggest form, insufficient to justify final approval. The studio lights dimmed slightly, not failing, conserving. Jonathan returned to his notebook. New pages had been added. A heading appeared at the top of the latest sheet. Final submission. Beneath it, a single instruction, typed with clinical clarity. Provide justification for continued inclusion. Jonathan laughed once, hollow and brief. Inclusion, he said aloud. In what? The room answered by doing nothing. He considered the problem like any other review. What was his function? He had designed the building. That role had already been absorbed, redistributed, credited elsewhere. He managed teams. Those teams now functioned without him. He approved decisions, but the system had found ways to approve itself. He contributed judgment, but judgment required recognition, and recognition was precisely what the room had removed. Jonathan wrote anyway. He filled the page with careful argument, outlining his necessity in terms of oversight, continuity, authorship. He cited past decisions, future risks. He drew diagrams showing failure modes that would arise without human intuition guiding the system. When he finished, the page slid smoothly from the notebook. The text faded, replaced by a single line. Redundant function identified. Jonathan felt lighter, not emotionally, structurally, as if weight had been redistributed away from him. Load paths rerouted. His shadow on the floor thinned, retreating toward the drafting tables, stretching into long, ruler-straight lines. The elevator doors inside the studio opened again. This time, the indicator did not display a number. It displayed a word, remove. Jonathan stepped back. Wait, he said, surprised by the weakness in his voice. If I leave, you already have, the room replied, though no speaker activated. Jonathan understood then the final cruelty of the 4th floor. It did not trap people. It archived them, and archives were only accessed when something went wrong. The elevator waited. The studio lights dimmed another fraction, and somewhere beyond the walls, the building prepared itself for demolition, a decision made decades from now. Already justified. Already signed by a name Jonathan no longer remembered writing. Jonathan did not step into the elevator. That refusal mattered. He turned back toward the center of the studio and stood there, deliberately placing himself where a reference point should be. If this room behaved like a system and everything about it suggested that it did, then it had to be operating from an initial condition, a foundational assumption it could not question. Every structure had one. Jonathan dragged one of the drafting tables out of alignment. The sound of wood scraping against the floor arrived late, as if the room needed approval before allowing friction to exist. He flipped the table over and examined its underside, searching for manufacturer marks, construction stamps, anything that tied it to a supply chain or a moment in time. There was a symbol, not a contractor's logo, not a safety certification, a hollow rectangle, empty inside. Its proportions matched the studio itself, perfectly scaled relative to the building's footprint. Jonathan felt a cold clarity settle in his chest. This wasn't architectural notation. It was a temporary placeholder, the kind used in early drafts to mark undecided space. A note to be resolved later, or ignored forever. You were here first, Jonathan said aloud. Before the building. The room did not respond. But the lights adjusted slightly, brightness recalibrating by a fraction too small to notice accidentally. Acknowledgement. Jonathan turned to the pinboard again. This time, he didn't look at the current plans. He searched for older versions, rejected proposals, early concepts the committee had dismissed as inefficient or impractical. He found one. No project title, no date, just a vertical section drawing. Between the floors was a shaded zone, unnumbered. A faint handwritten note sat beside it, reserved for later correction. Jonathan swallowed. The fourth floor had not been added to the building. The building had been constructed around the fourth floor. The windows began to tremble. Jonathan spun toward them. Outside, time was no longer accelerating. It was reversing. Dusk folded back into afternoon. Afternoon drained into noon. People walked backward along pavements. Traffic slid in reverse like rewound footage. Faces grew younger, but Jonathan was not among them. He pressed his palm to the glass. Cold. Solid. Real. The realization arrived fully formed. The room did not consume time. It anchored it. It was a buffer, an architectural margin where obsolete elements could be removed without destabilizing the whole system. Design decisions that no longer fit. People who once mattered, then didn't. Errors absorbed quietly so progress could continue. Jonathan laughed, softly and bitterly. "I'm the tolerance," he whispered. "The acceptable deviation." A new sheet appeared on the drafting table. Blank. No title block. No instructions. Just a page sized exactly to the studio. Jonathan understood. The room wasn't asking him to justify his existence. It was asking him to draw his final version. If he completed the drawing, the system would close. If he refused, he would remain here indefinitely, neither erased nor released. Jonathan picked up the pencil. His hand trembled not from fear, but from unfamiliar freedom. For the first time in years, he had no standards to meet. He didn't draw plans. He didn't draw sections. He drew imperfection, lines that refused symmetry, proportions that couldn't be optimized, a human shape that was inefficient, redundant, emotionally inconsistent, something no system could fully replace. When the final line was placed, the room exhaled. The lights softened. The elevator doors closed silently. Outside the window, time stopped rewinding. Jonathan straightened, exhausted. He knew what he had done. He had introduced an error that could not be corrected by design. Far in the future, a demolition report would be filed. The reason listed was brief. Intermediate structure no longer required. Jonathan turned back toward the elevator. The doors opened. One last time. Inside, there was no mirror. Only darkness deep. Still. Unmeasured. He stepped inside. And for the first time since entering the fourth floor, Jonathan Hale was no longer being evaluated. The elevator stopped without a chime. Jonathan felt the absence of sound more sharply than any noise. There was no sense of arrival, only the sudden understanding that motion had ceased. The doors slid open onto darkness that did not belong to an interior space. Cold air rushed in. Not recycled. Not filtered. Real. Jonathan stepped forward. His foot met uneven ground. Gravel shifted beneath his weight, crunching with a finality that sent a small, involuntary shiver up his spine. The smell followed next. Dust, damp earth, rusted metal, and something faintly chemical, like old concrete exposed to rain for too many years. He looked up. The building was gone. Not damaged, not partially standing. Gone. In its place stretched an open lot surrounded by temporary fencing. The metal bowed and weathered, signage bleached by decades of sun. Weeds pushed up through cracked foundation slabs. Piles of broken concrete lay half-buried in dirt, rebar jutting out like the ribs of something long dead. Jonathan turned slowly, searching for any vertical line that might anchor him. There was none. Where the office tower had once risen, where he had spent years arguing over tolerances and materials, there was only sky. A sign hung crookedly from the fence. The lettering was faded, but legible. Site cleared 1,974. Jonathan stared at the date, his breath fogged in the cool air. 50 years. He looked down at his hands. They were unchanged. The same hands that had gripped drafting pencils, shaken hands in meetings, corrected mistakes no one else noticed. They did not belong to a man displaced by half a century. They belonged to someone who had never been allowed to age. Jonathan walked the perimeter slowly. Each step felt heavier now, gravity reasserting itself as if reclaiming jurisdiction. Near the center of the lot, he found something that did not belong with the rubble. A single concrete slab, rectangular, smooth, set slightly lower than the rest. Like a footprint that had refused to erode, Jonathan knelt and brushed away dirt. Embedded in the surface was a familiar shape, a hollow rectangle, the same proportions as the studio. The fourth floor had never existed above ground. It had always been here. Memory returned in fragments. The early proposal meetings, the inexplicable resistance to certain design changes, the way the building had outlasted others from the same era, despite cost-cutting and rushed construction. The fourth floor had absorbed the failures, the revisions that didn't work, the people who no longer fit, the errors that would have caused collapse. It had bought time, 50 years of it. Jonathan rose unsteadily to his feet. There was no elevator behind him now. No door, nothing that would take him back, because there was nowhere left to return to. In the distance, traffic passed, modern, fast, indifferent. A group of students crossed the street nearby, laughing, phones glowing in their hands. One of them glanced toward the empty lot, frowned briefly as if something there felt off, then continued walking. Jonathan understood. He was no longer an anomaly. He was a remainder, a structural necessity that had finally been decommissioned. The tolerance had been exceeded. Jonathan stepped away from the slab. As he did, the air around him seemed to settle, the space finalizing its decision. Wind moved through the weeds. A bird landed briefly on the fence, then flew off again. Life continued without acknowledgement. Jonathan took a breath, then another, and with each step he took away from the ruin, the world accepted him less, not violently, not cruelly, but with the calm efficiency of systems doing what they were designed to do. By the time he reached the street, no one noticed him at all. And somewhere beneath the soil, where concrete once held back error and delay, the last trace of the fourth floor let go quietly, completely, having done its work. The midnight route. The platform clock said 12:47 a.m. It had said that for a long time. The second hand moved. The minute hand did not. Every few rotations, the fluorescent lights above the platform flickered in sympathy, as if time itself were breathing shallowly, unsure whether to continue. I stood near the edge, hands in my coat pockets, feeling the draft roll through the tunnel like a low, tired sigh. Midnight in the subway always carried a specific smell: oil, damp concrete, electricity warming metal. It was familiar enough to be comforting. That night, it felt staged. The station was nearly empty. A man in a maintenance vest leaned against a pillar, too still to be resting. A woman sat on a bench at the far end of the platform, her hat pulled low, gloves folded neatly in her lap. The train arrived without announcement. No screech, no warning lights, just a soft, heavy arrival, like something large settling into a space it had never quite left. The doors slid open. I stepped aboard because that's what you do when the last train comes. The car was older than it should have been. Wooden trim framed the windows. Brass fixtures dulled by decades of hands reflected the interior lights in warm, uneven halos. The seats were upholstered in dark fabric, patterned subtly, the kind of design meant to age quietly. Every passenger inside wore clothes from another era. Men in tailored suits, narrow ties, polished shoes. Women in long coats, cloche hats, gloves buttoned carefully at the wrist. No one spoke. No one looked at a phone. They sat upright, composed, eyes forward or lowered, as if waiting for something more important than a stop. I hesitated in the doorway. A man nearest the door glanced up briefly. His eyes were pale, almost colorless, and his expression held polite disinterest, the look of someone who has already decided you belong. I took an empty seat. The doors closed. The train moved. The first station passed without stopping. I recognized the name on the wall as we rolled through bright white tile, modern signage, but the train did not slow. The platform blurred past, empty and fluorescent, like a place remembered incorrectly. The next station was different. The lights were dimmer, the tile older, the signage cracked, the lettering obsolete. The platform bore no advertisements, no digital screens, only faded enamel signs and a bench worn smooth by long use. The train slowed, stopped, the doors opened. No one boarded, no one exited. The doors closed again. A murmur rippled through the car, not voices, but breath adjusting collectively, like an audience settling deeper into their seats. My pulse quickened. I checked the map above the doors. It showed no route, just a single line looping endlessly back into itself. The conductor appeared between cars. He wore a dark uniform, cut in a style I had only seen in photographs. His cap sat low, shadowing his eyes. In his gloved hand, he carried a small metal punch. He moved down the aisle without urgency, stopping briefly beside each passenger. They met his gaze in turn, calm and prepared. When he reached me, he paused. "Ticket," he said. His voice was quiet, practiced. I have a Metro card," I replied, already pulling my wallet out. He shook his head once. "Not accepted." The train swayed gently, rocking us deeper into the tunnel. "I can get off at the next stop," I said. The conductor smiled, just slightly. "There are no modern stops on this route." He held out his hand. "Payment is rendered in breath." I stared at him. "What does that mean?" The man behind me inhaled deeply, then exhaled into the conductor's waiting palm. The conductor nodded, punched his ticket. The man slumped back into his seat, eyes unfocused, chest rising more shallowly now. The conductor turned back to me. "Your turn," he said. I opened my mouth to protest, and that was when I noticed the paintings, figures rendered in charcoal and faded pigment along the interior walls, faces caught mid-expression, mouths open, eyes wide. Their clothing was modern, their expressions unmistakably recent. The train lurched forward again. The next station waited ahead, darker than the rest. And I realized, with growing certainty, that this train did not carry people through the city. It carried them at a time. The conductor moved on. His shoes made no sound against the floor, though the train itself never stopped speaking, steel wheels whispering against rail, the low rhythmic thrum vibrating up through the seats and into my bones. I sat rigid, hands clenched in my lap, aware of my own breathing in a way that made each inhale feel conspicuous. Across the aisle, a woman in a cream-colored coat watched the conductor recede. She had been beautiful once, in a careful, composed way. Now her face held the fragile stillness of someone conserving what little air they had left. She caught me looking. Her lips moved. "Just barely. Don't hold it." The train slowed again. This station was not on any map I knew. The tunnel opened into a cavernous space where the ceiling arched higher than it should have, ribs of iron exposed like the inside of something long dead. The platform was lit by bare bulbs hanging from cords, their light yellow and unsteady. Dust drifted lazily in the air, undisturbed by footsteps that never came. The name of the station was stenciled on the wall in flaking black paint. City Hall, lower level. I knew that name. A station closed to the public nearly a century ago. The doors opened. The man stood up from the far end of the car. He wore a hoodie, jeans, modern clothes, unmistakably out of place among the tailored coats and polished shoes. His eyes darted from face to face, panic already breaking through whatever logic he'd been clinging to. "This isn't right," he said, voice cracking. "This isn't my stop." No one responded. He rushed toward the doors, stepping onto the platform just as the conductor appeared beside him. "Ticket," the conductor said calmly. "I don't have one," the man snapped. "I just got on at Times Square." The conductor nodded, as if this confirmed something. "No fare," he replied. The man laughed short, sharp, hysterical. "Then let me off. I'll walk." The conductor raised his punch. The train lurched. The doors slid shut with the man still halfway between worlds, his body caught awkwardly in the narrowing gap. He screamed once, cut short as the metal sealed cleanly, impossibly, leaving no trace of him on the platform. Inside the car, the wall where he had been standing darkened. Lines appeared, fast, confident. charcoal biting into surface as if guided by an invisible hand. In seconds, a figure emerged, jeans, hoodie, mouth frozen mid-shout, eyes wide with realization too late to matter. A drawing, perfectly rendered. The train moved on. No one spoke. I tasted copper at the back of my tongue. The woman across from me closed her eyes. Her chest barely moved now. The conductor returned, methodical, stopping at each seat in turn. Some passengers leaned forward eagerly, offering their breath with quiet reverence. Others did so reluctantly, faces tightening as something essential was taken from them in increments too small to protest. Each punch of the ticket sounded like punctuation. When the conductor reached the woman, she inhaled shakily, then exhaled into his palm. The punch came down. She smiled, faintly relieved. Her eyes did not open again. I leaned away instinctively as the conductor turned toward me. "Please," I said quickly. "I don't understand the fare." The conductor studied me, up close. His face was older than the rest of him, lined, patient, eyes dulled by repetition. "Understanding is not required," he said. "Only compliance." "How much breath?" I asked. He considered this. "One passage," he replied. I swallowed. Around us, the car seemed to narrow, the ceiling pressing closer, the air growing stale. I felt suddenly aware of how much space my lungs occupied, how finite each breath truly was. "What happens when I run out?" I asked. The conductor glanced toward the drawings on the wall. "Your journey ends," he said. The train slowed again. This station was darker than the last, no lights at all. Just the suggestion of a platform slipping past, its outline barely visible. The conductor held out his hand, waiting, and in the glass of the window, reflected faintly over my shoulder, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Another version of myself, seated farther down the car, dressed in older clothes, watching me with exhausted recognition. I did not give him my breath. Not yet. The conductor's hand remained open between us, palm up, patient. He did not rush me. The train swayed gently, the sound of the rails deepening into something slower, heavier, less like motion, and more like circulation. I looked again at the reflection in the window. The other me sat 3 rows back, hands folded, shoulders slumped with a fatigue that felt earned. His coat was outdated, the cut slightly wrong by modern standards. His hair was thinner. His eyes, when they met mine in the glass, held no fear, only resignation. I turned back to the conductor. "How many passages do I have?" The conductor lowered his hand. For the first time, he looked genuinely attentive. "You've already taken several," he said. "That's impossible," I replied. "This is my first time on this train." The conductor's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. "It is your first boarding," he said. "Not your first route." The train slowed. Not toward a station, but toward a bend in the tunnel where the walls widened, brickwork replacing tile. The curvature older, more hand-built. Oil lamps flickered in iron brackets, their light warm and unreliable. The train stopped. The doors opened. This platform was narrower than the others, barely wide enough to stand on. The wall opposite the tracks was covered in names, painted and repainted over decades, layered so thickly they resembled sediment. No advertisements, no maps, just names. I stood and stepped toward the door before I could stop myself. The conductor did not intervene. On the wall, I found dates. Not opening dates, not renovation dates, birth years, end years. Some were scratched out, some were circled, some trailed off unfinished, the paint thinning as if the hand applying it had weakened mid-stroke. Near the bottom, written smaller than the rest, was a number. 330. I felt it before I understood it, a tightening in my chest, breath catching without permission. "That's your count," the conductor said quietly behind me. I turned. "Count of what?" "Passengers," he replied. "Completed." I shook my head. "I don't." "You do," he interrupted gently. "You just don't remember the early ones." The other me stepped off the train. He stood beside me now, closer than I wanted him to be. Up close, he smelled faintly of dust and cold air. like tunnels that hadn't been disturbed in years. "You don't remember," he said. His voice was hoarse, worn down by repetition. "You never do." "Remember what?" I asked. He gestured back toward the train. "The times you stayed," he said. "The times you paid in full." The doors chimed. Once, a warning. The conductor looked between us. "This stop is brief." The older version of me met my eyes. "You always try to leave it this one." "I know. What happens if I don't pay?" I asked him. He glanced toward the wall of names. "You already know." I did. I had seen the drawings. The frozen faces. The way modern clothes became part of the train's interior. Preserved not as people, but as records. The conductor extended his hand again. "One passage," he said. "Or remain." The tunnel air felt thin now, stretched too far between stops. I could hear the train breathing behind me. Doors open, waiting to be sealed. I inhaled, then exhaled slowly, carefully into the conductor's palm. The punch came down. The sound echoed longer than it should have. Something loosened inside me. Not pain. Distance. The older version of me smiled faintly and stepped back onto the train. "I'll see you again," he said. At another station, the doors closed. The train pulled away. I was left standing alone on the narrow platform as the light receded, oil lamps dimming one by one until only the names remained, layers upon layers of journeys completed. Behind me, the tunnel breathed in, and somewhere far below the city I thought I knew. The midnight route adjusted its count, marking one more passage taken, and many still owed. The lights went out without warning. Not all at once, first the far end of the tunnel, then the lamps above the platform, each extinguishing in sequence like a breath held too long and finally released. Darkness gathered quickly, thick and layered, swallowing the names on the wall until only their impressions remained, ghostly and unreadable. I stood alone. The air changed when the train returned. I heard it before I saw it, not the wheels, but the pressure. The way space itself tightened to accommodate something heavy and inevitable. A faint glow approached from the tunnel mouth, weaker than before, flickering as if the train were borrowing light rather than generating it. The doors slid open. Inside, the car was dimmer now. Fewer passengers, more drawings. The walls had filled while I'd been gone. Faces layered over faces, eras overlapping, modern jackets beside flapper dresses, sneakers beside polished leather shoes. Some figures were detailed, nearly lifelike. Others had begun to blur, their outlines softened by time or repetition. The conductor stood in the doorway. "This stop is unstable," he said. "Boarding is optional." That was new. I stepped back instinctively, feeling the platform tremble beneath my feet. Cracks spidered across the concrete, thin at first, then widening, revealing darkness below. Cold air rushed up through them, carrying the smell of wet stone and something older, something sealed away and forgotten. "What happens if I stay?" I asked. The conductor considered this. "You will become part of the record," he said. "Eventually. And if I board?" His eyes met mine. "You may find an exit." The train swayed. Doors open. Interior light pulsing weakly. Behind the conductor, I saw the older version of myself again, standing now, gripping a pole for balance. He shook his head once. "Not this way," his eyes seemed to say. The platform lurched. A section of wall collapsed inward with a dull roar, names and dates crumbling into dust that vanished before it hit the ground. The tunnel ceiling groaned, iron supports bending under stress they were never meant to endure. The midnight route was shedding weight. I ran. Not toward the train, but along the platform, toward a stretch of darkness where the wall had fallen away entirely. Beyond it yawned a service tunnel, narrow and unlit, its entrance marked by a rusted door hanging open on one hinge. The conductor called after me. "Passenger," he said, "your count is not complete." I didn't look back. I ducked into the tunnel just as the train's doors slammed shut. The sound reverberated through the space, followed by the deep, resonant pull of the train accelerating away fast, eager, like something relieved to be rid of me. I ran until my lungs burned, breath tearing in and out of me without permission. The tunnel sloped upward, uneven, debris crunching beneath my shoes. I scraped my shoulder against brick, felt skin tear, but didn't slow. Behind me, the darkness shifted, not following, closing. I burst through another door, this one newer, reinforced, and stumbled forward into complete black. Then, air, cool, damp, real. I fell out onto a concrete floor, coughing, gasping, dragging breath into my chest like it might be taken again at any second. Above me, faint and distant, I heard the city, sirens, traffic, life continuing. I lay there for a long time, counting my breaths, afraid to stop, afraid to start. When I finally pushed myself up, my hands shook violently. That's when I saw it. On the inside of my left forearm, just below the wrist, the skin was red and tender as if freshly marked. Dark ink sat beneath the surface, precise and permanent. A number. 330, the tunnel behind me was sealed shut. Smooth concrete. No door. No seam. Only a faint vibration. Far below, like a train passing through a place it had always known. I surfaced just before dawn. The stairwell smelled like rust and rain, the concrete steps worn smooth by generations of feet that had never known where they were truly going. When I pushed open the emergency exit, the city greeted me without ceremony, delivery trucks idling, a street sweeper humming past, the sky thinning from black to gray. New York, alive and indifferent. I stood there for a long time, letting the noise wash over me, counting breaths until they stopped shaking. No one looked twice at me. No one asked where I'd been. I could have been anyone finishing a late shift, or no one at all. I pulled my sleeve down. The number remained, 330. The skin around it was tender, as if the mark were still settling into place. At home, I showered until the water ran cold. The steam fogged the mirror, and for a moment, just when I thought I saw someone else standing behind me, coat outdated, eyes tired, waiting patiently. When I wiped the glass clear, the bathroom was empty. I slept for 12 hours. When I woke, it was afternoon, sunlight cutting cleanly across the floor. My phone buzzed with missed calls, messages stacked with casual concern. Life resumed with the speed and certainty of something that had never paused. I went to work the next day. The subway was normal, too normal. Digital signs glowed. Announcements crackled. People scrolled through their phones, annoyed and alive and firmly anchored to the present. Trains stopped where they were meant to stop. Doors opened, doors closed. No conductor asked for breath. No stations whispered names. Still, I stood farther back from the platform edge than I used to. Weeks passed. Sometimes, late at night, I felt the number on my arm itch, not like healing skin, but like a reminder, trying to be noticed. I searched for it online once, curiosity getting the better of me. Nothing. No missing persons list, no transit records, no archived incidents, just a handful of unrelated results, scattered and meaningless. But every so often, on the platform after midnight, I noticed someone counting under their breath, not time, passengers. Their eyes would flick briefly toward me, then away, unsettled, as if they'd almost recognized something important and decided not to pursue it. It happened again 3 months later. A delay, an announcement cut short, lights flickering in a way that felt rehearsed. A train pulled in that wasn't on the schedule, older than it should have been. I stayed where I was. The doors opened. Inside, the car was fuller than before. More drawings on the walls, more familiar faces. The conductor stood at the door, gloved hand resting lightly on the frame. He didn't look surprised to see me. He nodded. "Passenger 330, he said softly. "You exited during transit. I'm not getting on." I replied. "Of course not," he said. "Not tonight." The doors closed. The train moved on. No one else seemed to notice it had ever been there. That's when I understood. The midnight route doesn't hunt. It counts. It allows exits, not out of mercy, but out of balance. Some passengers are released back into the city, marked and recorded, carrying the weight of incomplete journeys. Not free, not taken, deferred. I still take the subway. I always will. Because one night, maybe years from now, maybe tomorrow, the platforms will empty just enough The lights will dim just slightly too much, and the clock will stop at 12:47 a.m. And when it does, the train will return, not to collect me, but to continue counting. And when it finally reaches the last number it needs, someone else will notice the mark on their arm and realize they are no longer just a passenger, but part of the route itself. You're still here. That's good. Most people are. After a night like this, even if they feel slightly different than when they started, the stories are over now. The doors have closed. The lights are coming back on slowly, reluctantly. If you heard something familiar tonight, if a place or a sound or a moment felt uncomfortably close, don't worry. These stories aren't warnings. They're reflections. They don't follow everyone, only those who are already looking. As you turn this off and return to your own quiet, listen carefully to the world around you. Notice how rooms settle, how time resumes, how normal things feel again. And if, later tonight, you wake up and sense that something is just slightly out of place, a sound that lingers too long, a shadow that doesn't quite agree with the light, take comfort in this. You're not lost. You're just passing through. Thank you for keeping me company tonight, wherever you are, whatever time it is. Sleep well, and remember, some routes only appear after midnight,